at night, even though I'm sitting here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment bedroom where it always makes my face look 10 times redder than it actually is. Here I am. So glad to be with all of you. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. Always glad to talk to all of you. Always glad to engage with all of you. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Put this on Reddit, put this on Twitter, put this on Facebook, put this on Instagram. Put this on every place that videos are shared. Let's have a great conversation. I was streaming almost every day for a while, and I finally decided it was time to take a social media detox. A social media detox, right? And so I took my social media detox, and after my social media detox, I'm back. I'm back. So glad to engage with all of you. Like I said, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. The way we do things here is that I write down your super chat questions as they come in. You provide the super chats, I write them down. Then I first give my opening remarks. Then after that, after I give my opening remarks, from there, we do the roll call, and then from there, after that, I answer your super chats, and then we're done. And that's how it works. All right, workers state replacing current U.S. state. Workers state U.S. state. All right. Economic calculation problem and problem. Alrighty. So here I am. Yeah, we're gonna do our show. We're gonna do our show the way we always do. So I'm back. I'm staring down the barrel of the live stream device, my iPhone, from which I live stream. And I'm talking with all of you, and it's Friday evening. I'll probably be back on tomorrow. But a couple things. I'm not going to give a big, long, complicated, and involved speech, though there will be some speeches posted on this channel very soon. Yes, there will be some very, very important speeches coming soon. No comment about what it's about. Coming attractions. There will be some important presentations coming up. But there's also another thing in the works that I'm sure you all are aware of. I've told you all I'm writing this book about BreadTube. I just got it back from the proofreader. Here it is. Here is the BreadTube book. All 108 typed pages. I have gotten back from the proofreader. I went and got it spiral bound. And I am going to have to go over it one more time, because you never know when you miss things that the proofreader didn't get. You always want to find a good proofreader. Some proofreaders absolutely suck, and they don't find any of your mistakes. And the proofreader I'm working with now is very skilled. She's really, really great. If she's watching, shout out to you. You know exactly what you're doing. So, the reason that I went on a social media detox was because it's one thing to just see all the toxicity on social media from the burn it down BreadTube sphere, Jabba the Vosh, and Skippy the Bear, and Surfing USA, and all the various arch nemesises of growth and progressive city building suit socialism. But in addition to that, it's one thing if you just see them working their magic, but then there's also if you're writing a book about them, right? If you're writing a book about them, you have to then think about them when you're not seeing them on the social media. And it can just be a little bit overwhelming. It can just be quite overwhelming. Most of this book is about ideas, not people. Most of this book is about ideas, not people. But there is chapter 1, Who and What is BreadTube, in which I have to talk about some individuals. I can't not talk about people in that section. So I have to go over it very, very carefully and make sure that they can't sue me, or if they do sue me, that it is completely groundless. I know I jokingly said I hoped one of them sues me, but honestly, no, I don't want to get sued, right? You never want to get sued. That's an unnecessary expense. It would mean that my book was very effective. It would be confirmation of the fact that I got under their skin and I said, truth that they don't want out there, but at the same time, who wants the hassle, right? So I have to go over chapter 1 very, very carefully with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that there is nothing that could be taken out of context or misinterpreted to mean something other than what it means. And then I just have to go through the rest of the thing. But it's pretty good. I feel good about this book. I really do. I wish it could be published already. I wish it was already out there. Arthur Porter has made an amazing cover for it. I mean, just an amazing, beautiful cover design. And, a lot of people have been very supportive. Robert was very supportive in this. Others have been very helpful in the process of putting it out there. So this is like a behind the scenes, right? This is like, the making. As I'm writing a book, I'm giving you all updates. So I have the full text of BreadTube Serves Imperialism, Examining the New Brand of Internet Pseudo-Socialism. I have it in my hands, like Joe McCarthy. In my hand! I have Caleb Maupin's new manuscript. Yes, it's here in my hand, and it will be coming out. And if you're a patron, if you're a Patreon person, you'll get a free copy. So that's one thing to consider. If you want to sign up on Patreon, if you're a donor, you will get a free copy of the book. If you're giving me a decent per month contribution, you will get your own copy in the mail. If not, it'll be available to order online as soon as I'm done going over the text one last time. Then I send it to the proofreader. Not the proofreader, I already got it back from the proofreader. Then I send it to the layout guy, my layout guy, who's a great guy, my layout guy, and I'll pass it on to my layout guy. If you're watching, Mr. Layout Guy, you're awesome. Love your work, Mr. Layout Guy. You really know what you're doing, Mr. Layout Guy. And after Mr. Layout Guy lays it out, we got our snazzy graphics in there and all of that, then we upload it, and then it's available, right? The book publishing process has gotten a lot simpler due to technology. RFK Sirhan, right? It's gotten a lot easier thanks to the falling rate of profit and the capitalist's drive to maximize their profits, right? There's not book binderies anymore where hundreds of people labor all day binding books. It used to be to publish a book that you had to get at least 5,000 copies. Did you know that? No book binder, no publishing house, even if you paid them, would publish a book unless you got at least 5,000 copies, right? Up into the 90s, this is how it was. If you published a book, you had to run 5,000 copies. Didn't matter what it was. Now we have print on demand. Print on demand where, you write the book, they publish it, one person buys it, one book gets printed, another person buys it, another book gets printed. Print on demand, right? I mean, it used to not be cost effective to do anything like that, right? But the capitalists and their drive to make profits and to eliminate workers from the assembly line, to maximize their profits by reducing the role of employees in production, all that stuff that Marx spent pages and pages talking about, right? The overproduction, the revolutionizing of the means of production, all of that stuff that Marx spent all those times, Crystal Sager, Leaving Hill. All that stuff, I mean, it has a direct effect. It is now much easier to publish a book than ever before. Meanwhile, writers make far less money than they used to make. Meanwhile, there's far fewer people that are hired in the book production industry. We have a big, giant book monopoly called Amazon, owned by the billionaire Jeff Bezos. And this is the natural process of capitalism, right? The bourgeoisie cannot exist, said Karl Marx, without revolutionizing the means of production, right? This is exactly the process Karl Marx discusses. The falling rate of profit, the revolutionizing of technology. Trump says he'll be reinstated. Stated Jesuit reductions. Alrighty. So that's where we're at. But I wanted to let you all know, again, this is not a big epic speech where I'm pounding the podium and urging you to rise up. This is just Friday night. I'm sitting here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment drinking water and just chatting with all of you. I wanted to let you all know, I don't know how many of you are subscribers to Sirius XM. Do folks get Sirius XM? Do folks get Sirius XM radio? I am going to be on Inside the Issues with Dr. Wilmer Leon. I'm going to be on that show tomorrow to discuss my book on Kamala Harris and the future of America. I'm going to be on Inside the Issues with Dr. Wilmer Leon on Sirius XM tomorrow to talk about my book on Kamala Harris. I'm going to tell you, the first time I ever went on Inside the Issues with Dr. Wilmer Leon, I don't listen to Sirius XM. I don't. I don't have a subscription. I don't listen to it. So, I met Dr. Wilmer Leon in Iran. I attended an important conference in Iran, and Dr. Wilmer Leon was there. And we got to know each other, became friendly. Couple months down the road, Dr. Wilmer Leon called me up and said, "Caleb, I'd like to have you on my show on Sirius XM." And I said, "Well, I would be happy to come on your show." So I went on his show, right? And he had me on there. I don't remember what the first thing we talked about on there. I think it was, it's generally geopolitics. I focus on anti-imperialism. All right. Gray zone. I figured I'm just going to go on there. So after I went on Dr. Wilmer Leon's show, right, and we had a good chat about politics and imperialism and racism and such. It's always a great conversation. After that, a number of people that I hadn't spoken to in years, people that I worked with years ago in Cleveland and doing activism, messaged me and they said, "Oh my God, I heard you on Sirius XM." I was like, really? You heard me? I mean, the listenership for Dr. Wilmer Leon's, show Inside the Issues on Sirius XM is very large. A lot of people listen to that show. It has a very, very big audience. And it should. It deserves a big audience because Dr. Wilmer Leon is brilliant. I mean, and I now go regularly on his show on Sputnik Radio also. He has a show, and Garland Nixon. They have a great show called The Critical Hour. We go on there, and I'm a frequent guest on The Critical Hour, and Dr. Wilmer Leon is amazing to work with. Garland Nixon is amazing to work with. Garland Nixon has his own YouTube channel, which is really phenomenal. You should check it out. He's doing great stuff, and between the two of them, they've got this great show on Sputnik, and Dr. Wilmer Leon started, doing this show on Sputnik on the basis of his show that he had on Sirius XM, which is a really, really good show. So, and he's had some really cutting edge interviews over the years. I mean, you wouldn't believe some of the interviews he's had. And so, it's really going to be a pleasure to go on Dr. Wilmer Leon's show tomorrow. But we're going on there to talk about our vice president, Kamala Harris. And so, because of the fact that, a lot of you are new to this channel, just checking this out tonight, you're new to everything that we do here. I thought that I might, in light of, it having been a while since we've talked about Kamala Harris and my, my treatise, my study of her, my essay in 3 parts, I thought I might actually read to you from the book on Kamala Harris a little bit, before we get to the super chats and all of that. I thought I might actually read to you from the book on Kamala Harris. I thought I might read to you. Just might read to you a little bit. It's a three-part book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts by Caleb T. Maupin. And I thought I might just read to you. Would you consider narrating books on Audible? All right. And based on that, I thought I might just read to you from the book. So it's 3 parts. It's an essay in 3 parts, and I used Kamala Harris to talk about all kinds of things. So I am actually going to start reading to you from Section 3, the geopolitical stage. Section 3 of the Kamala Harris book. This is Section 3 of my book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, which I will be on Sirius XM radio talking about tomorrow. I will read to you from Section 3. We're going to do a little bit of reading, and then after that, we'll do our roll call, and after that, we'll answer super chats, and that'll be our show for tonight. You know, I'm not in a super speechified mode. I'm working on some presentations that are coming up later this month. I've got about 1 million things on my mind. Got about 1 million things stressing me out right now, but that's okay. I've got important work to do. They're all good things for the most part. You know, a couple exceptions, but they're all good things. So I'll be reading to you. Kinky wants to know what page of the book I'll be reading to you from. I'll be reading to you from page 85 of my book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America. Here we go. In 2017, the gossip website, Page 6, blew the whistle on what was probably intended to be a secret meeting on Long Island, New York. Emily Smith wrote, "The Democrats' great freshman hope, Senator Kamala Harris, is heading to the Hamptons to meet with Hillary Clinton's biggest backers. The California senator is being feted in Bridgehampton on Saturday at the home of MWWPR guru Michael Kempner, a staunch Clinton supporter who was one of her national finance co-chairs and a lead fundraiser for her in 2008 bid for the presidency. He was also listed as one of the top bundlers for Barack Obama's 2012 re-election, having raised $3 million. The article went on to describe others who were meeting behind the Start that paragraph again. The article went on to describe others who were meeting behind the prosecutor turned politician. Guests there to greet Harris are expected to include Margot Alexander, a member of Clinton's inner circle, Dennis Mihail, a Democratic donor who is the chairman of the Battery Park City Authority, even though he lives in the sprawling Westchester estate and an Upper East Side pad, designer Stephen Gambrell, and Democratic National Committee member Robert Zimmerman. Washington lobbyist Liz Robbins is also hosting a separate Hamptons lunch for Harris. An article further reporting on the events described Harris's connections to another Clinton backer, the Hungarian billionaire George Soros. The Observer wrote, in The Observer, Michael Sanato wrote, in 2011, Harris's former aide, Lenore Anderson, was hired as campaign manager for Californians for Safety and Justice, which was financed by Soros Open Society foundations. Since 2012, Soros had led a 4-year, $16 million campaign to change California criminal policy, which Harris was deeply involved in as the California Attorney General. Lenore Anderson also led Vote Safe, another Soros-funded organization. While Clinton's continued attempt to test the waters for a 2020 run fell flat, Kamala Harris was the new pick of her top financial backers. Things looked good for Kamala, heading toward the 2020 Democratic primary. Founding Fathers. Communist. All right. things looked good for Harris, heading for the 2020 Democratic primary. She was only a freshman senator, but she was a charismatic speaker and was making a name for herself, grandstanding against Trump and interrogating his allies at televised congressional hearings. A definitive moment for Kamala's presidential campaign came on July 31st, 2019, when Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard used her limited time to make a short speech exposing Harris' record as a prosecutor. This was an odd decision for Tulsi Gabbard to make. Gabbard was treated as a fringe candidate and received very limited time on the debate stage. Why use the few moments of national airtime to single out a top-tier rival? Keep in mind that Kamala was not even among the two frontrunners. Understanding Gabbard's motivation gets to the essence of understanding the danger posed by Kamala Harris. While serving in the House of Representatives, Tulsi Gabbard remained a member of the Army National Guard. She served a tour of duty in Iraq. Despite being a member of the military, Gabbard's campaign focused on her anti-war platform and her call to stop arming terrorists in Syria and engaging in regime change wars. Illustrating her platform, Gabbard explained, "We have spent trillions of dollars on regime change wars in the Middle East, while communities like Hawaii face a severe lack of affordable housing, aging infrastructure, and the need to invest in education, healthcare, and so much more." Gabbard's website describes the landmark legislation she proposed, the Stop Arming Terrorists Act, H.R. 608, that would stop the U.S. government from using taxpayer dollars to directly or indirectly support groups who are allied with and supporting terrorist groups like ISIS and al-Qaeda in their war to overthrow the Syrian government. The legislation is based on congressional action during the Iran-Contra affair to stop the CIA's illegal arming of rebels in Nicaragua. It is endorsed by the Progressive Democrats of America, the U.S. Peace Council, and Veterans for Peace. Gabbard's presidential campaign was almost immediately attacked in the press, in addition to being often outright ignored. Hillary Clinton attempted to link Tulsi Gabbard to Russia, in response, Gabbard filed a defamation lawsuit. The fact that Gabbard met with the Syrian president Bashar Assad in a trip organized by the Christian-led Syrian Social Nationalist Party was also widely criticized. Whoa, still there? Sorry about that. All right, yes, was also widely criticized. Though Gabbard's campaign was highly unsuccessful, her takedown of Kamala Harris knocked her out of the race. Tulsi's few sentences exposing Kamala and Kamala's lack of an effective rebuttal turned the tides. On the debate stage, Kamala Harris could barely muster any response to Gabbard's very true exposition of her political record and obvious lack of moral compass. In a follow-up conversation with Anderson Cooper after the debate on CNN, Harris was once again given the opportunity to rebut Gabbard's remarks. All she could muster was to bait Gabbard for her alleged sympathies for the Syrian government. Following the July 31st debate, Harris began to sink in the polls. Harris's agitational style, castigating Trump with a pointed finger, and invoking racism and the hardship of her childhood was certainly charming at first. However, millions of Americans were led by Tulsi Gabbard to see Kamala Harris not simply as a person who would use her oral skills to prosecute Donald Trump, but as someone who would happily use it against their innocent fathers, brothers, sons, and daughters without remorse, in the hopes of simply advancing her career. Kamala no longer seemed bold, but rather quite frightening. The public rejected Kamala Harris at the polls. Bernie Sanders, attacked by the media for his alleged ties to Cuba, much like Karen Bass, would later be attacked and did far better among voters. However, the selection of her as vice presidential nominee, with Joe Biden's frail elderly condition, has her once again on the fast track to the head of state. despite the American people's better judgment. So why did Gabbard utilize her limited time on the debate stage to target a single candidate? Furthermore, why was a member of the Army National Guard running on an anti-war platform? This also leads back to the opening questions about why Harris's nomination for vice president was so last minute and surrounded by so much confusion. The reality is that a fight is taking place at the top of U.S. society, mostly behind closed doors. The fight goes on across party lines, within intelligence agencies, and inside the so-called deep state apparatus, and within the financial and business elite. Essentially, forces from many different angles are trying to hold off the destructive agenda of one very dangerous and powerful clique. Hillary Clinton ran the U.S. State Department from 2009 to 2013. It is doubtful that any individual U.S. official has ever done so much to damage the global community in such a short time. Clinton was backed by the same forces that now financially back Kamala Harris. She had a slew of staffers, including Jared Cohen, Samantha Power, Anne-Marie Slaughter, and Susan Rice. On the 28th of June, 2009, the Honduran military toppled the elected government. Manuel Zelaya, who won the elections fair and square, according to every poll and observer, was overthrown. In her book Hard Choices, Clinton claims he was removed due to, quote, fears that he was preparing to circumvent the Constitution to extend his term in office. This is false. Zelaya had been in the process of taking a non-binding poll among the Honduran public about whether or not they would favor the ratification of a new constitution. In Venezuela and in Bolivia, the Bolivarian governments had ratified a new constitution to move the country towards socialism. Zelaya simply wanted to see if there was a popular mandate for doing so in Honduras before proposing it to the legislators. The military, trained and armed by the U.S. government, was determined to make sure that this did not happen. Manuel Zelaya was kidnapped at gunpoint by the military and flown out of the country in his pajamas. A military junta assumed power. The result of this coup in Honduras has been horrendous. In 2009, Honduras already had the highest homicide rate in the world due to the prevalence of drug cartels among the impoverished population. From 2008 to 2011, the murder rate increased in Honduras by 50%. The U.S.-backed free market regime has not only presided over extreme poverty in Honduras, but it has maintained power through political assassinations. LGBT activists in particular have been targeted by right-wing kill squads aligned with the drug gangs. Immediately following the coup, U.S. President Barack Obama told the press that moves by the Honduras military were not legal. However, Hillary Clinton's State Department had been heavily involved in the coup long before it had happened. Jake Johnstone wrote an article for The Intercept, published on August 29, 2017, describing how top leaders of the Honduran military had been taking classes with the U.S. Department of Defense. The coup plotters were well connected with the U.S. military brass and friendly with members of Congress. While Barack Obama appears to have learned about the Honduran coup when it occurred, Hillary Clinton had been tipped off by Hugo Lorenz, the U.S. ambassador to Honduras, a week before. The U.S. State Department had then dispatched John D. Negroponte to meet with the coup plotters. Negroponte had a history of ties to political violence in Central America, going back to the Contra War in Nicaragua during the 1980s. He had been involved with Battalion 316 that had murdered 2,000 people in Honduras. After the coup, as the wave of assassinations of political dissidents began, the Hillary Clinton State Department showered the that showered funds on the propaganda campaign for the new regime. In 2012, as Honduras descended into social and political chaos in the wake of a U.S.-sanctioned military coup, the civilian aid arm of Hillary Clinton's State Department spent over $26 million on a propaganda program aimed at encouraging anti-violence alliances between Honduran community groups and the local security forces. Wrote Tim Chirac for The Nation on April 5th, 2016. The program, called Honduras Convive, was designed by the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, to reduce violent crimes in a country that had simultaneously become the murder capital of the world and a staging ground for one of the largest deployments of U.S. Special Operation Forces outside of the Middle East. A total of roughly $57 million in aid was provided to the Honduran government from the U.S. State Department from 2009 to 2014. According to the CIA World Factbook, 12%, well over 1 in 10 Hondurans, cannot read or write. The infant mortality rate is a whopping 14.6 deaths for every 1,000 live births. As drug violence persists, access to running water and electricity remain unavailable to large chunks of the population, and many thousands of refugees found at the U.S. border are Hondurans. The body count of the Hillary Clinton State Department in Honduras is most likely in the hundreds of thousands. Hillary Clinton enabled the overthrow of a democratically elected government and then proceeded to throw money at a death squad regime. The 2009 coup and the continued propping up of this regime with U.S. military personnel and funding, which she launched and to which Obama may at first have been oblivious, has resulted in the continued instability in a small country of just 9 million people south of the U.S. border. Malnutrition, lack of access to health care, lack of access to clean drinking water, drug gang violence, and political repression have taken a tremendous humanitarian toll. The violence has spilled over into Mexico and other parts of the region, and it has contributed to the overall decline of living standards in the region. Reading from my book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America. The Arab Spring events of 2011 were not spontaneous. They were said to begin when Tunisian fruit seller Mohamed Bouazizi lit himself on fire in December of 2010. However, suicides, even theatrical ones, often go unnoticed. In Muslim countries, the press makes a bigger point of not highlighting suicides for religious reasons. The reason Bouazizi's recorded self-immolation sparked a series of protests was not simply because it happened, but because it went viral. Videos of the flames and the local uprisings shot across Facebook and Twitter. Al Jazeera, the TV network owned by the U.S.-backed autocracy in Qatar, highlighted the events as well. In 2016, it was confirmed what had long been suspected. The Wall Street Journal reported, quote, Facebook Incorporated exerts more editorial control than it previously disclosed over the trending news feature on the social network. Now, newly posted documents show news stories do not go viral randomly based on how many clicks and likes they get. Rather, a select group of news curators who are not immune from political bias carefully manipulate the algorithms, deciding what stories show up on individual news feeds. In her State Department, Hillary Clinton had selected Jared Andrew Cohen to direct social media operations. Cohen is a Rhodes Scholar and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He is currently the CEO of Jigsaw, the corporation previously known as Google Ideas. Long before Clinton had worked at the State Department, Jared Cohen had participated in Clinton's policy planning staff from 2006 to 2010. In 2009, Jared Cohen contacted Twitter, asking them to help facilitate protests against the Iranian government in the hopes of destabilizing the government and overthrowing the Ayatollahs. In doing so, he went directly against the wishes of the White House. An article published in The New Yorker on April 25, 2011, cites an unnamed official reporting that Cohen almost lost his job over it. If it had been up to the White House, they would have fired him. Cohen took the move in direct disobedience of Obama, but in full obedience to Hillary Clinton. The article states, Clinton did not betray any disagreement with the president over Iran policy, but in an interview she cited Cohen's actions with pride. Anne Marie Slaughter, an academic who was essential in the Hillary Clinton State Department, loves the fact that Clinton took office intent on spreading unrest around the planet. Secretary Clinton can push the agenda she pushes because she is tough, and people know she is tough, Anne Marie Slaughter said. Anne Marie Slaughter is heavily influenced by Zbigniew Brzezinski. She speaks of a new form of governance through global networks. Her books with titles such as A New World Order and The Chessboard and the Web talk of destabilizing and overthrowing governments, paving the way for open governments, open societies, and an open international system. The Middle East was a ticking time bomb in 2010. Mass unemployment in the urban centers due to the financial crisis and a massive drought affecting the rural population all saw unrest on the horizon. The Hillary Clinton State Department decided to take a match to the tinderbox. With memories of the 1979 revolution in Iran the rise of Ba'athist Arab socialism in their minds, fearing uncontrolled unrest and the rise of anti-imperialist forces, the Hillary Clinton State Department preempted any explosion or organic resistance with a controlled demolition. The fact that America's first African-American president, a man with a Muslim middle name, who had attended an Islamic elementary school, sat at the presidency, was key in the magic of making it happen. Rather than pouring into the streets chanting "Death to America," the confused crowds would be covertly directed by social media and Qatari state media. The Muslim Brotherhood, a longtime soft power proxy of the U.S. in Egypt, Syria, and other countries throughout the region, would be the most influential force in manipulating these events. The Muslim Brotherhood had been utilized by the CIA to work against Arab socialist leader Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt during the 50s. In the 80s, leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood had staged a violent uprising against the Syrian Arab Republic, supported by the United States in their efforts to topple Ba'athist Arab socialism. Israel had even covertly supported the Muslim Brotherhood in the 1980s in order to divide the Palestinian resistance. A Wall Street Journal article from January 24, 2009, quotes Avner Cohen, a former religious affairs official in Israel, saying, quote, "Hamas, to my great regret, is Israel's creation." Let me read that again. Hamas, to my regret, is Israel's creation. Avner has been very public about the fact that he and other Israeli officials covertly supported the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine in efforts to attack Marxist Palestinian organizations like the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Eventually, from the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine emerged Hamas. The Muslim Brotherhood significantly gained from the Arab Spring. In Egypt, Mohamed Morsi was elected president. In Tunisia, the Muslim Brotherhood gained a huge amount of political influence. Of course, amid such events, all kinds of forces poured into the streets. Iran hailed an Islamic awakening, hoping to push the protesters towards Shia Islam and its tradition of resistance to oppression. Communists also joined the protests in Egypt and elsewhere. However, the news curators of social media and the producers of CNN arranged for the world to look the other way as Saudi Arabia invaded Bahrain to prop up the autocratic monarchy and slaughter the Shia majority who protested for their rights. The Yemeni People's Revolutionary Uprising, which set the stage for the eventual seizure of power by Ansar Allah and the Revolutionary Committee in 2015, was also ignored. Amid the chaos, Hillary Clinton's State Department worked specifically to target two anti-imperialist socialist states. The first was Libya. Until 2011, Libya had the highest life expectancy on the African continent. The country had universal housing and literacy. Gaddafi had constructed the great man-made river, the largest irrigation system in the world. Libya was leading talks of creating an independent African currency. In order to topple the most prosperous government in Africa, the U.S. State Department facilitated a flow of religious fanatics into Libya. Among them was Salman Ramadan Abedi, who returned to his home country of Britain and bombed the Manchester Arena, killing 23 people. When Hillary Clinton and her allies claimed was a glorious revolution, was actually a bloodbath of religious fanaticism and racism. The New York Times was forced to reveal the fact that anti-Gaddafi Libyans were lynching dark-skinned guest workers, with a headline that ran from September 5th, 2011, reading, "Libyans turn their wrath on dark-skinned migrants." As social media rallied instability in Libya, social media conveniently agitated the public with slogans like, "Gaddafi is killing us with his Africans." Clinton protege Susan Rice told the press that Gaddafi was distributing Viagra in order to encourage his soldiers to engage in mass rape. Amnesty International later debunked this claim. The results of overthrowing the Islamic Socialist government of Libya have been disastrous. Conditions have become so bad in Libya since it has joined Anne-Marie Slaughter's open international system that people are packing onto boats by the thousands to flee. Since 2013, 700,000 Libyans have crossed the Mediterranean into Europe on boats. Hundreds have died in numerous instances where these ships have sunk. In 2017, the world was shocked to discover the existence of open-air slave markets in Libyan cities. Much of the country remains without electricity. Instability persists as different factions battle for power. Jihadist groups had significantly increased their presence in the region, and much of the instability in Mali and other countries has been linked to the toppling of the Libyan government. Videos surfaced of Hillary Clinton being informed about the death of the socialist leader who raised millions from poverty in Libya, much like the way Kamala Harris cackled with delight about imprisoning the parents of low-income children. Clinton giggles and proclaims, "We came, we saw, he died." The Syrian Arab Republic, a holdout of Ba'athist Arab socialism, was also targeted. The life expectancy in Syria increased by 17 years from 1970 to 2009 due to the huge efforts of the socialist government to provide medical care and train doctors. Infant mortality dropped dramatically from 132 deaths per 100 live births to only 17.9 during the period, according to the Avencia Journal of Medicine. The U.S. Library of Congress Country Study of Syria, published in 1987, described huge achievements in the field of education conducted by the Ba'athist socialist state. During the 1980s, for the first time in Syria's history, the country achieved full primary school enrollment for males. At the same time the country study was published, 85% of females also were enrolled in primary school. In 1981, 42% of Syria's adult population was illiterate, but by 1991, illiteracy had been wiped out. The Soviet Union had cooperated with the Syrian government to engage in big construction projects, including the Takba Dam on the Euphrates River, which enabled irrigation of the countryside and provided hydroelectrical power to the population. In more recent decades, China had increased its cooperation with the Ba'ath Socialists. In 2007, the Jamestown Foundation reported that China had invested hundreds of millions of dollars in Syria in efforts to modernize the country's aging oil and gas infrastructure. But Hillary Clinton and her wrecking crew moved in to destroy it. The Syrian Arab Republic had already been labeled as a state sponsor of terrorism due to its arming of the Palestinians. The fact that it had turned down the proposal to build an oil pipeline with the U.S.-aligned autocracies of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, but instead was working to build one with the Islamic Republic of Iran, was also most likely a factor in driving the destruction of a previously peaceful Arab country. The Syrian government attempted to accommodate the concerns of the protesters, who took to the streets in 2011 by ratifying a new constitution, because many of the protesters were Sunni Muslims, influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood in Saudi Arabia to oppose Bashar Assad as a, quote, Shia apostate for his Alawite religious background. The new constitution specifically honored Sunni Islam. Assad began praying in Sunni mosques and engaging in other activities that are not done by Alawites in order to show solidarity with the Sunni majority. The USA began arming and training extremists to tear down the Syrian Arab Republic almost immediately after the 2011 Arab Spring protests. In 2013, the BBC published a guide to Syrian rebels. Listed among them was not only the infamous Islamic State organization, but also the Nusra Front, previously known as Al-Qaeda in Syria. Other organizations with names like the Islamic Front, the Islamic Liberation Front, the Afad al-Rasul Brigades were also listed. While U.S. media, Al Jazeera, Twitter, and Facebook dazzled Western audiences with stories of revolutionaries fighting for human rights against a dictator, the reality is that the anti-Assad coalition was primarily concerned about ending religious freedom and establishing a Saudi-style Wahhabi autocracy. Early on in the fighting, UN official Carla Del Ponte confirmed that the U.S.-backed terrorists in Syria were utilizing chemical weapons in their fight against the government. Child soldiers made up a significant percentage of the anti-government fighting force. Homeless children and orphans throughout the region were being shipped to Syria, indoctrinated into the Saudi brand of Islamic extremism, and then sent to die in the fight to overthrow Ba'athist Arab socialism. The humanitarian cost of the conflict in Syria, which the Hillary Clinton State Department engineered, has been well over 500,000 lives. Millions of Syrians have become refugees. The Syrian government remains intact despite relentless efforts to overthrow it. Russia and Iran have offered significant support to the Syrian government. Hezbollah fighters from Lebanon were decisive in defeating ISIS on the battlefield. Qasem Soleimani, who Trump assassinated with a drone on January 3, 2020, was key in fighting to protect Christians and religious minorities from U.S.-backed fanatics in Syria as a leader of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran. In April of 2016, when asked about his biggest regret about his presidency on Fox News, Barack Obama said, quote, "Probably failing to plan for the day after what I think was the right thing to do in intervening in Libya." Later in the interview, Obama stated that the intervention, quote, "did not work." Furthermore, in May of 2017, Obama described his decision not to attack Syria with cruise missiles as his, quote, "most courageous decision as president." What is interesting about both of these statements is that Hillary Clinton and her State Department were heavily involved. In 2011, Hillary Clinton and Samantha Power pushed very hard for Obama to intervene in Libya. Obama did so and regrets the results and the manner of the intervention. In 2013, Hillary Clinton also pushed for Obama to directly attack the Syrian Arab Republic in response to allegations about chemical weapons. Obama did not do so and considers this a great moment. This reveals what was also hinted at when Obama attempted to fire Jared Cohen over his meddling in Iran via Twitter. The Obama administration was at odds with the Hillary Clinton State Department. Barack Obama replaced Hillary Clinton with John Kerry as Secretary of State in his second term. John Kerry focused not on spreading revolution and destabilizing countries, but rather on establishing diplomatic relations with Cuba and negotiating the Iran nuclear deal. Kerry's State Department seemed not to clash with the White House to any significant degree. But the Obama White House was not the only faction within the U.S. government apparatus that seemed to realize how dangerous the actions of the Hillary Clinton State Department really were. Amid the 2013 crisis, when it appeared Obama was on the brink of launching cruise missiles against the Syrian government, many rank-and-file soldiers expressed disgust on social media. On September 1st, 2013, mainstream outlet Business Insider observed, as the march to limited military intervention in Syria moves forward, some troops are making their views known, albeit anonymously on social media. Photos of service members have apparently popped up on Reddit, seemingly in protest of the Syrian intervention. The basic argument is that the line between the moderate rebel faction and al-Qaeda-affiliated ones are somewhat murky in the 2-year-old civil war, so the U.S. should stay away. Indeed, many within the U.S. intelligence agencies, military brass, and State Department learned to speak and read Arabic in order to do their jobs. It is likely that many of those who are motivated by a desire to defeat terrorism and protect American civilians from another 9/11 were horrified to discover that the U.S. government was actively arming the entities that would eventually establish the Islamic State. In Syria, just like Afghanistan during the 1980s or in Libya during the 2011 revolutions, the U.S. government was not opposing the terrorists. The USA was helping and arming the terrorists in the hopes of destabilizing a socialist state. So understanding that many within the Pentagon realized the harsh realities of what was done by the Hillary Clinton State Department, it should not be surprising that an Army National Guard soldier became the primary congressional voice in opposition to destabilizing Syria by arming terrorists. Tulsi Gabbard represents a whole layer of people within the Pentagon who are disillusioned with the humanitarian intervention, regime change, foreign policy of the United States. Pentagon figures like National Security Advisor to Donald Trump, Michael Flynn, made similar statements. It should not be surprising that during her presidential campaign, Gabbard used her limited time to verbally take down the newly selected candidate of the faction behind the Hillary Clinton State Department. The specific group of wealthy donors that Kamala Harris met with in the Hamptons, who had put their money behind Hillary Clinton, made a group decision to pick Kamala Harris as their new great hope in 2017. Her personality profile and career history seemed to match what they were looking for. The forces that seek to create an open society at the cost of unlimited human lives have lined up behind Kamala Harris. The utopian bloodlust of the revolutionary intelligentsia has been hijacked to serve imperialism. The permanent revolution the Soviet people rejected is now being taken up by Western intelligence agencies. It is no longer intended to empower the proletariat, but to unleash the impulses of millions and tear apart the authoritarianism of civilization which restrains capitalist greed. It shouldn't be surprising that Joe Biden, who sided with the White House against Clinton's State Department, would be reluctant to add Kamala Harris to the 2020 ticket. It's not surprising that he would delay the decision as long as possible and scour the party for any possible alternative. It fits the narrative that, as Karen Bass appeared from nowhere in the eyes of the media as suddenly being a potential VP pick, a dossier of information about her alleged ties to the Cuban government suddenly found its way to the front pages. Who keeps track of Cuba's contacts in the United States and monitors who travels to the socialist island? Who compiled such information on Karen Bass and kept it on file in case she was ever to gain significant traction? Many people behind the scenes know who is behind Kamala Harris. They know how many millions of lives were needlessly destroyed by the Hillary Clinton State Department. They know how many terrorist groups expanded, how a refugee crisis was created, and global instability persists long after the demented experiment with social media and revolution concluded in 2013. The fact that Trump made statements on the campaign trail about how, quote, Hillary Clinton literally created ISIS was no accident. The fact described in this text may not appear on CNN, but they are well known to numerous people within many layers of what has now been labeled the deep state. Somehow, Kamala Harris overcame her many opponents. Her faction was able to maneuver its way to secure her position as vice president, despite Biden's reluctance and the voters' lack of interest in this supposed rock star freshman senator. When Kamala Harris accepted the nomination on August 19th at the Democratic National Convention, her remarks and the video that preceded them were predictable. Kamala mentioned her father in passing, but eulogized her mother in glowing terms. When talking about her accomplishments as a prosecutor, Kamala Harris declared, quote, I've fought for children and survivors of sexual assault. I've fought against transnational gangs. I took on the biggest banks, and I helped take down one of the biggest for-profit colleges. I know a predator when I see one. The sentence, I know a predator when I see one, was followed by an awkward pause. Meanwhile, after Harris was announced, many media outlets and Trump supporters had been highlighting the fact that on April 2nd of 2019, Kamala Harris stated that she believed 4 of the women who accused Joe Biden of sexual assault. Harris had said, quote, I believe them. I respect them being able to tell their story and having the courage to do it. No retraction of her statement was ever made. The line from Kamala Harris's acceptance speech seemed to be an affirmation of her assessment of Joe Biden. If indeed she knows a predator when she sees one, she would have been correct in believing his accusations. Most interpreted the comment as merely a reference to the widespread allegations that Donald Trump sexually assaulted women. But such a statement at the Democratic National Convention would not be coded or followed by an awkward pause. One wonders what heated exchanges took place behind closed doors in the lead-up to Joe Biden's announcement that Kamala Harris was the VP pick. The fact that Kamala's name appeared separate from the VP nominee on the Democratic Convention schedule, published just shortly before the announcement, or that Kamala's Twitter unfollowed Joe Biden just a few hours before, is also very telling. It seems Joe Biden did not want to nominate the woman who invoked his ties to segregationists and was backed by the same forces that spawned Hillary Clinton's State Department, an entity which he and Obama tried to contain. Something changed Joe Biden's mind right before finally announcing his selected running mate. The decision came a full 10 days after the deadline Joe Biden had given himself. Yes, that is from Chapter 3 of my book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America. A number of observations that were conveniently left out of mainstream media. And I will be talking about this book tomorrow on Inside the Issues with Dr. Wilmer Leon on Sirius XM Radio. Check out my book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America. I follow some threads that many people don't follow. So there you go. That was fun. And I love all of you, my audience. I really, really do. We have a great time here. We're doing a great thing here. It's very, very good stuff. All right, folks, be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. And on that note, names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's here? Winnipeg, Cleveland Pirate Alex, JT24 in Mississippi, Chaya in Montreal, Bermuda, Detroit, Michigan, Tennessee, Nate in Chicago, Natalie in Maryland. Welcome, Natalie. St. David's, Bermuda. Tucker Marks. Thank you, Caleb. Zephyr from Eugene, Oregon. Welcome. Space Coast, Florida. Springfield, Missouri, USA. Nashville, Branson, Missouri. Allen in Chicago, Temple City. Char Darling out in Nassau County. Good friend of the program. Richmond, Virginia. Springfield, Mo. Ramiro in East LA. Good friend of the program. Adelaide, Australia. Juan from Mexico. Mo in Toronto. Kinky from SoCal. SoCal, so red. Hello from North Macedonia, West Virginia, Santa Barbara, California. Alex from New York, Miami, Florida, Cincinnati. Ricky Rosso from Texas, Vinicius from Brazil, Tony from Tasmania, Lynn from Portland, Oregon, Jeff in the studio, Auckland, New Zealand, Illinois, Ithaca, New York, Michael Rostarucci, Tamara and Dario from Brooklyn, welcome, Joe from my 2 to 8 p.m. shift, Mohsen from Iran, Jose Huao from Sao Paulo, Brazil, Ellie from Cuba, Tampa, Florida, Herb Bryant. Richie from Staten Island, Wilmington, Delaware, Pomona, California, Moria, New York, like Scottish Moria, Martin in Ireland, Quinn from Longview, Washington, Los Angeles, 417 Gang, Indonesia, Kendall from San Diego, Quebec, New Jersey, Dan Keating. Very, very good. Indonesia. Someone from Indonesia. Balthazar in Oakland is with us tonight. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? Legend Zhao Shanghai. Welcome, welcome, welcome our friend from Shanghai. Anybody else? Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations. Anybody else? Fort Lauderdale, Sir Craigie. Shout out to you out there in Fort Lauderdale, Sir Craigie. Very good. It's Moira, says Darth Buddha. I get a kick out of it every time. Very, very good. Very, very good. Hot Pot King, China. Is that a city? Hot Pot King? I like hot pot Chinese food. That's good stuff. Hot pot meals are delicious. They're expensive, but they are delicious. I don't think we can do that now. The pandemic, it's just not safe with the pandemic. Maryland, 100% right. Chicago, Samuel Netton. Max Hessen in Boston. Very, very good. Very, very, very good. There you go. Very, very good. Very, very good. Anybody else? Stephen in Riversdale County, California. I'm getting hungry now. You got me thinking about hot pot meals. They're delicious. They are just darn delicious. All right, folks. I have a number of super chats to answer, but if you want me to answer another super chat, by all means, do so. do so. Another super chat question. I will write it down and I will answer it. And then that's the second half of our show. So keep them rolling in. How did the West make Egypt not revolutionary anymore? Make Egypt not revolutionary. Okay. All right. I'll write them down as they come in. Now, the first question I got was, would a workers' state replacing the U.S. state be necessary in the transition to socialism? And that absolutely it would be. In order to transition to socialism, you would need to completely change the nature of the police. You would need to completely change the nature of the military. You would need to completely change the nature of the intelligence apparatus. Absolutely, right? That, as we've read in books, as we read in The State and Revolution by Lenin, creating a new state is absolutely necessary. Char Darling says, if Kamala Harris hosted a court drama reality show, I'm sure it would be called You're Going to Jail. Yeah, can you imagine that? I'm Kamala Harris on You're Going to Jail. Yay! Yeah. It's like Wheel of Fortune or something. It's sick. I mean, lock him up, Kamala. I mean, she is mighty rotten. But back to what we were talking about before. Workers' state. Look, absolutely, right. In the new book on BreadTube, I have to point this out. Right, there's this quote that the BreadTube sphere uses, where Lenin says, Marx says, we cannot take hold of the ready-made state machinery. And, Marx is pointing out the Paris Commune showed that you have to have a new state. Mao's law of contradiction. You have to have a new state. All right, that you need to create a new state. And that the Paris Commune showed that the working class can't just take hold of the state that exists. They have to create a new state apparatus. They have to create new institutions, right? And, the workers' councils, the Soviets, the Bolivarian circles, the peasant associations in China, all of these things are that you cannot just seize control of the ready-made state machinery. Now, where, all these various BreadTube kooks lie is they say that Marx did not advocate creating a state at all. But if you actually read where that quote comes from, the Civil War in France, in the very next paragraph, he's going on and on about how great it was that the Paris Commune created new state institutions. So they're just lying when they say Marx wasn't a statist. No, Marx was in favor of creating a state. He was just saying that just like the bourgeois state was created to serve capitalism, in order to create socialism, you need a new state. You have to change the nature of the state. That it's not simply a matter of getting elected and commanding the capitalist army, commanding the capitalist police, commanding the capitalist CIA. But no, in order to transition to socialism, you have to break down the old institutions and create new ones. And this, according to all the writing that's coming out now, right? If you read all this stuff about democratic regression, this is a big talking point among the liberal foreign policy analysts, is they basically say that even if there's a popular mandate for it, you can't do this, right? They're saying that Venezuela is no longer a democracy, even though the people voted for Hugo Chavez, because Chavez changed the nature of the state. He changed the way the army works. He created the Bolivarian circles. And if you tamper with independent institutions like the army, like the judges, then it's no longer democratic. This is how they operate now, right? Is that they have argued that if you take power and you change the state in order to serve the people, the USA considers you not to be a democracy. This is the nature of this kind of rhetoric, right? It's not a democracy if we lose, right? If you change the nature of the state. And they accuse Putin of doing the same thing. Putin got elected. He changed the nature of the military, changed the nature of the security services. And they say, oh, that's democratic regression. Even if the people vote you into office in a free and fair election, if you get in there and start changing the way the state works, these independent institutions, suddenly it's not a democracy. And they're independent when they serve the United States, right? When they just de facto serve Western capitalism. When the Venezuelan military was tied in with the U.S. military, got training in the USA, it was independent. Now that it gets training in Cuba, Chavez and Maduro have been tampering with this independent institution, right? When the Russian economy was, in free fall and collapse, being looted by Western corporations during the 1990s, it was independent. And when Putin reasserted state control with Gazprom and Rosneft, suddenly they were tampering with independent institutions. This is the game that they play. When they're in charge, things are just how they're supposed to be. When we change that, when anti-imperialists and revolutionaries change the way the government works, change the way the economy is organized, suddenly it's dictatorship. It's not democracy anymore because, everything's just de facto supposed to serve Western capitalism. It shows how ridiculous it is. But, I wish I had it here. I could just pull the book up, but the book is in the other room. But William Z. Foster, in his beautiful, beautiful book, Twilight of World Capitalism, William Z. Foster talks about how the program of the Communist Party was to elect a coalition government, a government based on trade unions and the Communist Party and anti-war activists and anti-racist forces, but that such a government would have to change the nature of the state. It would have to completely change the military. It would have to completely change the police. It would have to start nationalizing industries, and that it would, out of necessity, have to move towards socialism. If you had an anti-monopoly government in the United States, the only way it could stay in power was by changing the nature of the state. And so an anti-monopoly government, or a worker and farmer government, I guess that's a little outdated. Small farmers are not a huge factor anymore in the United States. But at one point, the position of the Communist Party was for the election of a workers and farmers government. And with the understanding that for a workers and farmers government to take power, it would have to change the nature of the state. It would have to create workers' councils and Soviets. It would have to empower community organizations. It would have to start taking apart the military and the police state apparatus. History and motive of cultural revolution. That's a very good question. And that's very important. It's very important to understand this. Some people think that Lenin's teaching on the nature of the state means that you have to advocate violence, means that we have to go around advocating terrorism and violence. That's not what it means. That's a crude misinterpretation. What it means is the state, in essence, is armed bodies of men. The police, the military, the CIA, the FBI. That's the nature of the state. And in order to have socialism, you have to dismantle the old state and create a new state. Right? You have to create new institutions, right? I'm sorry, but if we elected a socialist government, right, and we elected, revolutionaries and socialists, if I became president tomorrow, I couldn't just call up the Pentagon and be like, hey guys, I'm the new boss, just so you know. You have to start doing what I say. They'd be like, no. You'd have to create a new military. You'd have to fire all the generals and bring in new generals. You have to change all the rules of how things work. Right? You'd have to, look, if I got elected mayor of New York City and I was a Marxist and a revolutionary, do you think I could just call up the NYPD and be like, hey, I'm a communist and I'm the mayor, so they would be like, no, you have to have new state institutions. You would need a new constitution to create a socialist America. I think you would probably have to ratify a whole new constitution. Now, an anti-monopoly government, and this is the important distinction, right? That Let's be clear here. Right? Let's be clear. So an anti-monopoly government is something that could be elected. When I talk about a government of action that fights for working families, a progressive government, that could happen under capitalism, but it would be immediately attacked, right? You'd be immediately attacked, right? But yes, an anti-monopoly government could be elected. But an anti-monopoly government would then have to proceed to change the nature of the state. And when an anti-monopoly government, out of necessity, being faced with the threat of a coup and overthrow, had to change the nature of the state, right? It would be taking apart the police and the military and the FBI and the CIA and these institutions created to serve capitalism, creating new institutions to serve the working class and the majority. So in the process of doing that, right, creating a new state, a new constitution, and all of that, It would then be establishing what's called the dictatorship of the proletariat. And we hate to use that word. This is a Marxist terminology, but the government under capitalism. Capitalism is the economic system, but the government under capitalism is the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, meaning that the bourgeoisie, those who own the means of production, dictate what goes on, and the state represents them. So dismantling their government and creating a new proletarian government would be the process of creating, instead of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, the dictatorship of the proletariat. That's all it means, right? So that would be phase 2. You would get the dictatorship of the proletariat, a new state. And then stage 3 would be the dictatorship of the proletariat, creating socialism and using the power of the state to change the economy and forcing the economy to be organized to serve public good and not profit. So this is really, we're talking about 3 different things. And these are 3 terms that people get confused about. People think that when I say we need a government of action to fight for working families, that's socialism. No, that's the first stage towards socialism. Those 4 steps that I've listed, right? That we would need to rebuild the country with a massive reconstruction project. You know, we would need to put oil and natural gas and coal and timber and all our natural resources under public ownership. We would need to nationalize, have public control of banking. We would need to enact an economic bill of rights. Those 4 steps would be the things that a government of action would do, that a worker and farmer government would do, that an anti-monopoly government would do, right? You know, that would be the first step, would be a progressive government taking power under capitalism and taking dramatic steps to rescue the country, a government of action that fights for working families. And that is the immediate program of the proletariat. If you are serious, right? If you want to be taken seriously by people, you go to them with your immediate program, a government of action. But as a Marxist, you would realize that if a government came into power in the United States, and that government was mobilizing the population to rebuild the country, putting natural gas and natural resources, nationalizing them, you know, putting banking and putting all the bankers out of business, putting a monopoly in the hands of the state in terms of banking, and enacting an economic bill of rights, immediately the military, the police, the FBI, the CIA would be moving against them. And so, obviously, such a government, in order to stay in power and not be violently overthrown, would be forced to dissolve the FBI, forced to dissolve the CIA, forced to dissolve the military, and create a new working-class socialist military, create a new working-class socialist FBI, create a new socialist working-class CIA, create new socialist police forces, right? That in order to stay in power, it would be forced to create a dictatorship of the proletariat. And once a dictatorship of the proletariat was created, such a dictatorship of the proletariat with new police and new military and etc. would then be able to enact socialism. And you would be able to have a centrally planned economy. You would be able to have the means of production be under the control of society. And that these are 3 different concepts. Government of action, that is the electoral program of electing a popular front, whatever you want to call it. We call it a government of action to fight for working families. William Z. Foster called it an anti-monopoly state. They called it a popular front government. They called it a workers and farmers government. But that's the first step. The second step would be that government taking decisive action to change the nature of the state, and that would be enacting the dictatorship of the proletariat. And the third step would then be the creation of socialism. And these are 3 different things. Government of action is a progressive, anti-war, anti-imperialist regime getting elected under capitalism. Right? That's what they're trying to do in Peru right now. In Peru, they're on the brink of electing a popular front anti-monopoly government, right? Hasn't happened yet, but we'll see, right? Peru, Pedro Castillo, he's basically running in the hopes of creating such a thing. Then, if that government then changed the nature of the state, which they did in Venezuela, right? Chavez got elected and was gradually forced more and more to change the nature of the state, create a new military, create a new, then when the state changes with a new constitution, a new military, new community organizations and Soviets, etc., when you do that, that's called the dictatorship of the proletariat. And then, when the dictatorship of the proletariat uses the political power to control the means of production, That's called socialism. So it is a three-stage process, and these are not interchangeable terms. These are not interchangeable terms. It's a long answer, but it's an important question, right? And that's why, if you're a serious Marxist, right, you don't go around telling people, we need a dictatorship of the proletariat. You don't go around telling people, well, you might, in the abstract, talk about the need for a new system, but the immediate program that makes sense to people is you say, we are for a government of action that fights for working families. And you list steps that an actual elected government could do, right? And so, the policy of a communist party, and this is how, look, in the United States, we got a bunch of crazy Maoists running around talking about people's war. We got a bunch of crazy Trotskyites being crazy. But this is what real communist parties do, okay? Right? If you go to any other country in the world, the Communist Party has a platform that calls for an anti-monopoly state, a government of action to fight for working families, a worker and farmer government, or whatever. And so my slogan, we need a government of action to fight for working families, that is me with the Center for Political Innovation trying to put out into the discourse the understanding of how communists and socialists tend to operate. We tend to advocate a popular front anti-monopoly state, right? And I think I've made myself clear, but this is really important to understand, and this is how it has worked, right? We assume, and this is a mistake, right? A lot of people want to assume that no popular front government could ever be elected. Well, first of all, we don't know that. Okay, we don't know what the balance of forces would be. A popular front government did get elected in Venezuela. A popular front government did get elected in Nicaragua, right? So there are situations where it could happen. But regardless, even if the capitalists would never allow, would just, unleash fascism and violence to prevent a popular front government from getting elected, you still, as a responsible communist, should be advocating that, right? And letting the people respond to the blatant violation of their democratic rights, right? The communists do not go around advocating violence, because advocating violence alienates people and is not working class. Working class people do not like violence. No sane, rational person wants their country torn apart by a civil war. We communists do not want that. We favor a peaceful transition to socialism. We recognize that requires the dictatorship of the proletariat. It requires the creation of a new state. Okay, but we do not favor or advocate a violent revolution. And anyone who tells you that communists are advocates of violence or a violent revolution is wrong. Ultra-left adventurers might advocate that. Terrorists and ultra-leftists may advocate that. Anarchists may advocate that. But responsible Marxists and revolutionaries do not advocate civil war. They do not advocate violence. This is the Marxist understanding. And this is the understanding of Lenin. This is the understanding of Mao Zedong. This is the understanding of Fidel Castro. This is the understanding of Maduro and Hugo Chavez. This is the understanding of Ho Chi Minh. This is the way responsible, serious revolutionaries, the kinds who wear suits, the kinds who represent organizations of millions of people, the kinds who actually take power in places like Vietnam and Angola and Cuba and Venezuela and China, this is the way they operate. Crazy Trotskyites operate differently. And when was the last Trotskyite revolution? Has anyone ever seen a Trotskyite revolution? I missed it. I can't think of one. Crazy ultra-Maoists. When was the last successful crazy ultra-Maoist revolution? Well, maybe Nepal, except they stopped being crazy ultra-Maoists, and now all the crazy ultra-Maoists hate them, so it doesn't really count now, does it? But other than like a few exceptions, there's never been a crazy ultra-Maoist revolution. There's never been an anarchist revolution. There's never been a Trotskyite revolution. Revolutions are made by suit socialists, by responsible Marxists, by people who wear suits and ties, by people who have a coherent program, people who advocate a peaceful transition to socialism and get elected. And doing that, building the organizations necessary and the community power necessary to build up popular power in order to advocate and put forward an electoral program based on the understanding that we need a government of action, a popular front, that begins the process that eventually leads to the dictatorship of the proletariat and to socialism. And if people want to cut this, save me the time and cut it yourself. That would be really appreciated because, yeah, it's an important distinction to make. All right, this is an important distinction to make. But this is how responsible communists understand this stuff. This is how responsible communists understand this stuff. William Z. Foster, Gus Hall, Mao Zedong, Ho Chi Minh, Maduro, Hugo Chavez, Daniel Ortega. This is Evo Morales. This is the responsible understanding, right? A lot of ultra-left crazies don't get this, right? But this is how responsible communists have always understood this. All right. Okay. The economic calculation program. Okay, so I believe my understanding of the economic calculation problem is it's libertarians put forward, you can't have a planned economy because the economy is so complicated. How could you possibly calculate how much of everything to make? The market decides how much steel is made. The market decides how much aluminum is made. And if you can't have a government just think of everything, that's stupid. Is that the economic calculation problem? That is my understanding of it, right? That no one could possibly centrally plan everything. It's the magic of the market. People voting with their dollars that decides all this. You could not have a central planner make the economic calculation about how much steel to make, how much aluminum to make, how many books and cars and radios to make. Only the magic of the market could make such a distinction. That is the argument. Well, I would like to point you toward an entity that engages in economic calculation all the time. That entity is known as Walmart. There are bureaucrats, technicians, technocrats that sit at the center of Walmart all the time, ordering how much aluminum gets shipped where, how much products go to what store. And they use computers to do it, to calculate exactly how much is needed. And if the economic calculation problem were true, then Walmart would have collapsed. Because no computer, no person at the center of a big corporation could possibly know how much that an entity as large as Walmart needs. Amazon. Right? Amazon. Right? Amazon is much bigger than most countries, and so is Walmart. And somehow, the central planners at the center of Amazon are able to centrally plan how your books get delivered, how your food gets delivered. And yes, they use computer algorithms. And yes, they poll people. And yes, they base it on how much is consumed. But they do it. The idea that you cannot centrally plan things is refuted every day by capitalist corporations. The thing is, capitalist corporations centrally plan in the interest of their own profits. So if capitalist corporations are able to economically calculate and centrally plan, why the hell couldn't state organizations, couldn't socialist organizations, right? If Amazon can centrally plan, if Walmart can centrally plan, then a socialist state can centrally plan. It's a BS argument. It is a BS argument, right? It's a BS argument, right? It's not an argument against states. It's actually an argument against big entities. No entity at the center could ever have enough data to make the appropriate decision. That's not true. That's simply not true. In the capitalist world, we see examples of economic calculation going on all the time. And again, this is one of those libertarian arguments that never gets refuted. And it annoys the crap out of me that it never gets refuted, right? And why does it not get refuted? Why does this argument not get refuted? Why? Because, Mr. Libertarian, president of the Harvard Ayn Rand Club, you can't have socialism because it's too many numbers. How could you calculate everything? It's like scary. I'm really bad at math. Imagine I was doing math for the whole country. Oh, it would be bad. I failed geometry in high school, so imagine if I did that. Oh no, we should just have capitalism. I love Ayn Rand. Thank you. Thank you very much. And he sits down. And so then the rebuttal is a guy from Jacobin, or it's Jabba the Vosh, or it's Skippy the Bear. And they get up there, wah, 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 Oh, we don't want central planning either. You're absolutely right. Economic calculation has never achieved anything. The Soviet Union was a hellhole. They didn't invent space travel or anything. China never did anything good. No, it's never worked anywhere. Yeah. We just want independent worker cooperative. Socialism just means that pencil factories are owned by pencil makers. And they just get up there and, and so Ayn Rand College Club gets up. See, even the socialists agree with me. You can't possibly centrally plan anything. I failed geometry in college. You can't centrally plan anything. And Vosh agrees with me, and Jacobin agrees with me, and Thought Slime agrees with me, so therefore we can't centrally plan everything. I just sat here and refuted this economic calculation problem in about 2 minutes. I said, really? You can't centrally plan? How about Walmart? How about Amazon? Oops, oopsie doopsie, and the whole thing just fell apart like a house of cards. I swear, BreadTube is set up to make sure that nobody does what I just did, right? I mean, it's unbelievable to me, right? I mean, it's like no one can centrally plan anything. How can you be a socialist? I mean, how can they not refute this? It's beyond me. But yes, the economic calculation problem is one of the many, many, many bullshit arguments against socialism. It's not true. And it's thrown out there all the time, and it's very easy to debunk. But when the voices of socialism are all people who don't really believe in socialism, they believe in employee stock ownership programs, it never gets refuted. I will never forget one time I watched a debate, and the guy from well, never mind. Anyway, I'll say it. The guy from Jacobin is on there, the Jacobin editor guy, who's blocked me on Twitter. He's just like the most, that guy from Jacobin, he has got to be the most charismatic person ever. You listen to, the Socialist Manifesto guy, I don't even remember what his name is. You listen to him talk, and you burst into tears and you join the revolutionary movement immediately. He's just so interesting to listen to. Sarcasm. But one of these libertarians gets up there. Well, Mr. Socialist, if socialism's so good, then why do all the people flee and run away from socialist countries and go to capitalist countries like America? Brilliant argument, made by the Libertarian Militia Club. The president of the Libertarian Armed Militia Club. Yeah, everyone's running away from socialism because they took our guns away. They're running to capitalist America. Why is that, Busker? Right? So, Busker gets up there. He's like, well, people, sometimes run away from capitalist countries to, other capitalist countries. My family went from India to Europe, and I think sometimes people go from country to country, and people travel a lot. I don't think we should necessarily assume that all travel is necessarily caused by capitalism or socialism. You're already completely bored listening to me, and the only thing I'm saying is that all travel is not travel. And he just, he's up there rambling about traveling. My family traveled, your family travels. You can travel on a bus, you can travel on a plane, you can travel. He's just up there, he's giving them the most bored response. And Libertarian Gun Club guy's there, and it's like, there's people drowning on rafts trying to get away from socialism in Cuba to get to a glorious capitalist America. You're an idiot to believe in socialism. And he's just, one could possibly travel on a kayak. One could potentially travel upon a freight train. I once traveled upon a car that ran on diesel fuel. It was quite interesting. He's just up there just rambling about people traveling. I'm sitting there watching this debate, and my head is ready to pop. And I'm like, why are all the people piling into the U.S. border every day? There's a big crisis on the U.S. border right now. People are piling in to get away from libertarianism, to get away from free market extreme policies that have wrecked Honduras, that have wrecked Guatemala, that have wrecked Mexico. Libya when it was a socialist country, people were trying to get in to Libya. Now that Libya has become a capitalist country, people are drowning in the Mediterranean trying to get out. You know, Nicaragua, a socialist country, you'll notice people aren't fleeing from there. People are fleeing Guatemala. People are fleeing Honduras. People are fleeing Belize. People are fleeing Mexico. They're not fleeing Nicaragua. Like, there's a real answer to this. But he's on there to just, you got Jabba the Vosh. Rah, 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 rah. Socialism is just worker pencil factories. Rah, 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 rah. And then you've got, Bhaskar, and he's just, yes, well, I travel on a bus, travel on a boat. I once traveled to India, traveled to Thailand. One can travel all kinds of places if you get a ticket. Sometimes the tickets are expensive. Other times they are not expensive. My family once traveled, and not everyone who travels necessarily travels to socialism or capitalism, or sometimes I travel to feudalism. I mean, sometimes I travel to hunter-gatherer civilization. I mean, I travel to all kinds of different civilizations. I'm very wealthy. I get lots of money by running this boring socialist magazine that no one reads, and I travel to all different places. So, it's like, and you see this, and it's just like, the debate around socialism is so staged. It is so staged. I mean, I don't understand why people aren't more angry about this, right? We have so many people in the United States. We have the Communist Party, we got, various Marxist groups, we've got all kinds of people who've given their lives to this, who really believe in this, who've studied this in depth, and we got all of that. We got all of this. We got, and then, like, instead of having, people who actually care about this and know this stuff lead the movement, they find this weird, video game playing kid who is who thinks that it's okay who thinks it's okay to buy child porn because your computer, and that's the voice of socialism. I mean, does it bother anybody that Vosh is the voice of socialism in the United States? Does that bother anybody? Does it bother anybody that, that the representatives who've been chosen to lead our movement are not charismatic at all and know nothing about what they're talking about? I'm just saying, right? I'm a little bit too negative. See, this is me being negative. You all like the impressions, though. The impressions are great. I love doing the voices and all of that. That's a lot of fun. But yeah, I'm being a little bit too negative here. But it's just, the Economic Calculation Project. Yeah, it's again, a real socialist could knock it to shreds. Unfortunately, though, the socialist social media is packed full of people who cannot make coherent arguments. And I think that is why they are there. And I will argue that very strongly in the upcoming book, which I'm going to have to force myself to proofread one more time. So there you go. All right. RFK and Sirhan. Well, RFK was shot by Sirhan, right? I mean, I don't know what do you want me to say about it? I mean, there's, many conspiracy theories about it. I haven't looked into it. I mean, I think there was some football player who grabbed Sirhan, right? After he shot RFK, I think there was a famous football player at the time who was a supporter. It was an African-American football player. I can't remember his name, and he grabbed Sirhan from behind. The Weathermen, the Weather Underground, dedicated their book, their book Prairie Fire, which was like their manifesto they distributed everywhere when they were doing their bombing campaign. They published this book called Prairie Fire, and it was dedicated to a number of people, among them Sirhan. Keep in mind, Kennedy was against the war, right? RFK was against the war. Also keep in mind that, he was running on an anti-war platform. He was reminding people of the optimism. He could have possibly beaten Nixon. And oh goodness, did we just lose light? Wow, that's the first time this has happened. We just lost light, everyone. I'm still here. It's not the camera. It's not the camera that has a problem now. I just accidentally unplugged the light. Isn't that amazing? I unplugged the camera light with my foot. And now we're going to plug it back in. Hold tight, everyone. It's going to be okay. I just have to plug it back in. This is amazing, right? Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. But we're still here, and we're still kicking, and here I am. Wow, isn't that amazing? I turned the camera light back on. Wow. You guys are the most loyal audience. I swear, you guys will forgive me for anything, right? We just had a blackout. There's been times that the stream goes down. You guys are amazing. I love you guys. You guys will tolerate everything that can go wrong, going wrong on these streams. You guys are amazing. The light is back on. Fear not. It was a size 10 shoe. It was a size 10 shoe. Fear not. I'm sure someone's going to clip this and say I didn't pay my electric bill. I was some jerk. I remember I did an interview. One time for a TV network. I'll never forget this. I did an interview one time for a TV network, and I was working at that point in my office. I was working as a press TV reporter, and my office was at the UN, okay? And I'm in the press area of the UN. And for those who don't know this, if you've ever been in the press area at the UN, many people have not, the lights, Dos Santos, the lights in the press area at the UN, they're on a motion detector. They're on a motion detector. And so if you don't, if somebody doesn't walk down the hall or whatever, they just go out, right? It's just, they're on a motion detector. It's to save energy. It's to save Mother Earth. It's, super environmental. So I'm doing this interview over Skype, and I'm giving my analysis of like Syria or something. I don't even know what the topic was. So I'm on there, and of course, after about 5 minutes, the lights went out. So somebody took the clip off YouTube. I will never forget this. Took the clip off YouTube, posted it on their YouTube channel, and said, Caleb forgot to pay the electric bill. And it's just like, really? Really? Like, first of all, I'm clearly not at my home. I'm at the UN. Second of all, there's motion detector. It was just, give me a break. People are shallow, and that's one of the dangers of being on here, right? You all can clip this and do whatever you want with it. I accidentally unplugged the darn thing. If you want to know what happened, that's what happened. But there you go, right? People are relentless, and that's why, it's like, it gets frustrating. That's why I do things like take a social media detox, because it's just like, you just want to scream sometimes, the things people say, right? Apparently, for those of you who don't know, you should know, right? You've been watching this for however long. All I do on these lives is rant hatred for trans people. Did you know that? This is just hours and hours of transphobia. I've had many people tweet at me that all I do is promote transphobia on my hours and hours of streams. Did you know that? That's all I do. I just get on here and preach hatred for trans people for hours and hours and hours. Hint, I don't really do that. But anyone who's ever watched me knows I don't do that. But that's the wisdom that many of these breadtube folks have tweeted at me. So there you go. There you go. All right. We're having a great time. I actually did not know about Crystal and Sager leaving the Hill. I don't like a lot of what Crystal and Sager have said about China, but overall, I found their programming to be very good during the elections and all of that. So I'm really sad to hear that, because honestly, I found them both to be very entertaining and insightful. I really liked Crystal and Sager, and I'm really sorry to hear that. But I'm sure they're not finished. They're popular. They have a lot of fans, Crystal and Sager. So I'm sure they have a great career ahead of them. So there you go. All righty. All right. Trump says he'll be reinstated. Well, you have to wonder about that, okay? Now, I saw that. Does Trump really think that? Is he saying that to get his name back in the headlines? I don't know. Is he saying that in order to give hope to the fans, the QAnon people who think that? Has he just cracked? Is he senile? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what. I did hear that Donald Trump apparently does believe he will be reinstated, and I don't. I think he might run for president again. I think that's very likely, but reinstated? Yeah, don't count on it. Don't count on it. All right. I have no idea what the Jesuit reductions are. I know who the Jesuits are. The Jesuits, that's a monastic order, right? You have the Dominicans, and you have, there's many monastic orders, Opus Dei or whatever. The Jesuits are a scholarly monastic order, a lot of academic priests. I do not know about their reductions, so I'll have to look that up. But thank you for the super chat and asking the question. All right, when am I going on Gray Zone? Anytime they'll have me. I love Gray Zone. They do amazing stuff. Ben Norton and Max Blumenthal, who I've hung out with many times. He's really great. And, Dan Cohen. And, yeah, they're great folks. They're great folks. Great folks. So, yeah, I mean, hey, say the word, say the word. They do their own thing. They're doing their own thing. We get on here and we talk and we read books and we do our thing. But they're doing, Aaron Mate and them. They're doing this like investigative thing. Okay, they're doing a lot different stuff than I do, right? And it's a very different thing than what I do. But if they wanted to stream with me, I'd be happy to do it anytime. Say the word. Say the word. All right. And keep the super chats rolling in, folks. I got plenty to say. Plenty to say. The night is young, as they say. Would I be open to narrating my books on Audible? Yes. I don't know how to set that up. I'm sure it's not that hard. The thing is, I only have so many hours in the day. I just wrote a book. I'm planning some events, and there are only so many hours in the day. Okay, and I do have a job. I do report the news for a living, and between these streams and writing books and writing articles and, being heavily involved with trying to set up the CPI and, there are only so many hours in the day. I'd be open to recording my books on Audible if more people would listen to them. I know a lot of people, audiobooks are better. I listen to audio while I clean my apartment and stuff like that. So, audio is very important. So there you go. Were the founding fathers communist-oriented? I'm going to go with no, because that was, capitalism was the new revolutionary system back then, and, in the aftermath of the overthrow of feudalism. While they did have progressive ideas for the time, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, etc., they were very much capitalist-oriented. The most progressive of the founding fathers, Ugopnik. I've not heard of Ugopnik, I.O. I don't know what that is. What is Ugopnik? The most progressive of the founding fathers, by far, was Thomas Paine, right? Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense, which was like the manifesto of the American Revolution, the pamphlet urging support for the American Revolution. Thomas Paine, it was a very, very, very revolutionary person. He advocated an abolition of slavery. He was in favor of the abolition of slavery. But he went further than that. Thomas Paine advocated a guaranteed minimum income for all citizens. And he wrote a book about it, calling for a guaranteed minimum income. In addition to that, Thomas Paine was the most anti-clerical and the most blatantly anti-religious of the founding fathers. He actually wrote a book arguing that much of the Bible is based on astrological symbolism, right? That the sun rises on the spring equinox above the constellation of a cross, right? And that Thomas Paine was very anti-clerical. Thomas Paine was advocating a guaranteed minimum income. Thomas Paine was an advocate of opposing and abolishing slavery. And Thomas Paine also went and fought in the French Revolution. After the American Revolution, he wasn't done, and he went and joined the French Revolution. So of all the quote-unquote founding fathers, Thomas Paine is probably the most revolutionary. Now, does he count as a founding father? He did not, obviously. He was not an author of the Constitution. He was not a signatory of the Declaration of Independence, if I'm not mistaken. So he was an agitator, but I consider him to be a key figure in the American Revolution. I would consider him to be a founding father. But at the same time, maybe, some people wouldn't. Thomas Jefferson. A lot of people really like Thomas Jefferson. I don't, honestly. And I really think that people need to get past. Look, for a long time, and this is one thing that I will say that the communists got wrong, right? Earl Browder, he oriented the Communist Party of the United States to honor Thomas Jefferson. And, they changed the name of the Communist Training School in New York City. They had what was called the Lenin Training School. And they changed it to the Jefferson School. And up into the 50s and 60s, they had a Jefferson bookstore. The Communist Party would have bookstores around the country that were called Jefferson bookstores after Thomas Jefferson. And Earl Browder even wrote about the Hamiltonian counter-revolution. And this is all wrong. It's all fundamentally wrong. Thomas Jefferson was not good. Thomas Jefferson was a settler populist, right? His theory of the yeoman, right? The idea that the United States would be a country of independent small farmers, and every little farmer would have his tract of land, and no one would bother him. I'm sorry, eventually there's going to be a drought, and some people are going to lose their crops and get in debt to the big farmers. And pretty soon, a lot of those small farmers are going to be proletarians hired to work on the big plantations of capitalists, and capitalism is going to centralize. I'm sorry, you cannot have an economy of small farmers, right? You can't do it. And the idea that you shouldn't have a central bank, look, if Alexander Hamilton had not built the lighthouses of America, right, had not set up a central bank and used the central bank to build lighthouses, the United States would not have become a hub of global trade, right? Jefferson's libertarian, small farmer, settler populism thing was, yes, it certainly appealed to a broader strata of the population, no question about that. But at the end of the day, it just wasn't good economics. It wasn't going to lead to the United States flourishing economically. You needed infrastructure, right? You needed infrastructure. All right, class reductionism. All right, we'll talk about that. And so, yeah, I actually really, Christian Parenti. And I'll give credit to the LaRouche people. They have been beating the drum and popularizing Hamilton for years. Christian Parenti, the LaRouche people, they have changed the perspective. And now I think the majority opinion among Marxists, even the Jacobin crowd, all of them, we all admit that, that Thomas Jefferson, he wasn't so good. He had the more populist rhetoric, but at the end of the day, it was settler populism, and it was libertarianism. Thomas Jefferson is the patron saint of liberalism. Say one thing, do another. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, Red Illuminati. And look, Thomas Jefferson was a rapist, right? We know that. I mean, Sally Hemings, he raped one of his slaves. I'm sorry. And then people say, well, they were in love. Yeah, well, if you own somebody, if someone is literally your slave, they cannot consent. Just like children cannot consent, slaves cannot consent. So Thomas Jefferson was a rapist, right? We know that. He was a rapist. Thomas Jefferson, he freed all of his slaves after he died. Oh, that's nice, right? Be a slave owner while you're alive, but afterwards, give me a break, right? Thomas Jefferson was pretty shitty in a lot of ways. I'll be real. Thomas Jefferson was, he personally said he was opposed to slavery, but he still participated in it, not just owning a huge plantation, but actually raping his slaves. He had bull honky economic theories, the yeoman. He was a good writer. He knew how to stir up the masses. Yagopnik, Marxist YouTuber from the Balkan region. I will have to check him out. I've never heard of him. Not heard of him, but I will check him out. Yeah, I'm sorry. Not a big fan of Jefferson. Hamilton wanted to recognize the Haitian slave revolution. That was very progressive. Hamilton was anti-slavery. And Hamilton understood that you need the state to build infrastructure, and that building those lighthouses was essential to stabilizing the U.S. economy. There's a beautiful pamphlet. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you very much. There's a beautiful pamphlet written by Henry Carey that I would encourage you all to read. And Karl Marx endorsed it. It has the Karl Marx seal of approval. There's a beautiful pamphlet by Henry Carey called Harmony of Interests. And it ends by talking about how there are two systems in the world. There is the American system and the British system. And when they describe the British system, they're describing what Lenin later goes on to describe as imperialism, right? The British system, Adam Smith economics, is about driving down living standards, whereas what Henry Carey and Hamilton considered the American system was using the government to build infrastructure, right? And that, that there was a constructive, industrious, technological side to the economics of the Founding Fathers. The libertarian settlerism of Jefferson, was balanced out by this kind of city building, I don't know what you want to call it, city building, this city building progressivism that you find in Alexander Hamilton and Henry Carey. And that city building progressivism, Hamilton, Henry Carey, that stuff is a big influence on Friedrich List, the German economist. and actually on Eugen Dering. Eugen Dering, who was the socialist who Engels polemicized against in his very famous book, Anti-Düring, which was then compressed into his book, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific. So it's important to know about this stuff. Look, economics is very important to understand. Adam Smith, Ricardo, Malthus, Hamilton, Carey, List, this stuff, you know, is all an influence on Marx. One of the best works of Marx, he didn't actually write it, it was published after his death based on his notebooks, is called Theories of Surplus Value. And in that book, Marx goes over all the other economists who came before him and critiques them and shows what he learned from them and what he got right and what they got wrong. And it's a very, very important book, Theories of Surplus Value. And it's considered to be volume 3 of Capital. So there you go. Okay, so long story short, the Founding Fathers were not communists. All right, how did the USA make Egypt not revolutionary? Well, you know, Abdel Nasser was definitely, you know, a revolutionary and anti-imperialist. You know, he was replaced with Sadat, and Sadat was middle of the road, but then you'll notice that Sadat, the Muslim Brotherhood, assassinated Sadat, and Sadat, you know, was assassinated from the right by the Muslim Brotherhood. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, Egypt moved in a free market direction, and by the time Hosni Mubarak was in power in Egypt, I mean, it was a capitalist country. You know, the revolutionary energy that came out of Arab socialism and Abdel Nasser was very much, good God, was very much, one thing, if it's not one thing, it's another thing. Was very, very much, you know, was very, very much, you know, lost. All right, next question. I know, seriously, right? I mean, it's New York City. My goodness, if the lights don't go out and you got cockroaches, I mean, this is, goodness gracious. All right. All right. All righty. You know, Mao's law of contradiction was the next super chat question. One must always divide into two. One must always divide into two. And this is dialectics, dialectical materialism, right? That history advances through struggle and contradiction, and that there are two things that contradict each other. The first is a thesis, and the thesis produces the antithesis. And the antithesis and the thesis clash until they create a synthesis. And the synthesis then becomes the new thesis, producing a new antithesis, that then clashes once again, creating a new synthesis. And that this is the process through which history changes, right? This is the advance of human history. Contradiction, right? This is the process. And Mao Zedong, in his essay on contradiction, his focus is on finding the primary contradiction, right? There are secondary contradictions, and there are primary contradictions. And there are many contradictions in the world, but one should be struggling to determine which is the primary contradiction. Yeah, I mean, this is Mao Zedong thought, right? You know, there you go. All right, the history and the motive of the Cultural Revolution. Well, the Cultural Revolution started in 1966. So first, in 1961, the Soviet Union and China had their falling out. They weren't getting along anymore. They weren't getting along with each other, the Soviet Union and China. So after they had their falling out, China was arguing that it needed to be more revolutionary, referred to the Soviet Union as revisionists. They argued that they were far more revolutionary than the Soviet was. Oh, the People's Party. All right. People's Party in U.S. history. All right. Very good question. People's Party, U.S. history. All right. So they had the Great Leap Forward, which was not a very successful economic, you know, it was a disaster, but it was an attempt to, you know, move China very rapidly toward a socialist planned economy, and the fact that the Soviet Union pulled out their aid, and some natural disasters really ruined the Great Leap Forward. It was a disaster. After that, there was some pretty widespread criticism of Mao within the Chinese Communist Party. There was a feeling that the Chinese Communist Party was dominated by elements who didn't fully believe in communism, right? That there were a lot of elements in the Chinese Communist Party that were, just kind of Chinese nationalists or whatever. So it was really Lin Biao, who was a general in the Chinese People's Liberation Army, who mobilized what they called the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. And that was the mobilization of teenagers, youth, to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party, basically. I mean, it was, they got all thousands and thousands of young people, and they formed clubs called Red Guards. And these Red Guard clubs were mobilized to overthrow the party. The Red Guards, it started out at a particular university in China. The students were protesting, and Mao heard about it, and the students were hanging up these posters, these what they call big character posters. I don't want to say the name in Chinese because I'll sound like a fool because I don't speak Chinese. But they call them big character posters, and the big character posters were being put up. So Mao and Lin Biao heard about this. They went to the campus, and they put up their own big character posters. And their big character poster said, "It is right to rebel. Marxism consists of 1,000 truths, but they all boil down to it is right to rebel against reactionaries. For thousands of years, people have been told it is wrong to rebel. It is right to submit. It is right to be oppressed. But Marxism says it is right to rebel." This was the slogan of the Cultural Revolution. And they did so. And there was also a situation where a lot of the plays and that they were performing, they did traditional Chinese ballet, traditional Chinese performances. A lot of it was glorifying feudalism and kings and princes and stuff. So in the arts, Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, led this complete overturning of the arts. If we're going to do a play or a musical or we're going to write novels or we're going to do any of this, it's got to be communist. It's got to be in line with the communist line. And they had the 8 model works. They were basically 8 model works. If you wanted to write a book or write a play or make a movie, it had to follow one of 8 plot lines. They were the 8 model works. And these Red Guard young people, they went out and they broke stuff. Right? And, if you had a store and the name of your store was the Imperial Store in honor of the Chinese emperor, they would go to the store and they would rip the sign off of your store and smash it and then put up a new sign that said the Communist Store, right? If your store said, if your movie theater was called the Peace Movie Theater, right? Well, they would come and they would rip down the sign that said Peace Movie Theater and they would change it to the Revolution Movie Theater because you can only have peace with a revolution. They smashed a lot of ancient temples. There were a lot of temples that were symbols of feudalism and of superstitions and stuff. They smashed them. And the young people of China, the Red Guards, were mobilized. Thousands and millions and millions and millions of young people throughout China. They went to Beijing and, they would pile into Tiananmen Square and Mao would walk out on the balcony and do the Mao wave and wave at them. And they would sob and break into tears that they had seen the great leader. And they followed the march of the Long March, and they marched the Long March themselves, and they would collect little pieces of dirt from the sites of historic battles. And, if their parents were saying anti-communist things, they would tell the other Red Guards, and their parents would get together and break into the home of the parents and search all their property. And, if somebody had an opium pipe in their house, right, opium was considered counter-revolutionary, and the Red Guards would search their home for counter-revolutionary material. If they had an opium pipe or they had a, Buddhist statue or something like that, they, after they searched their home, they would beat the person up and injure them. And if people were found to have done something that was against the party line, they would be dragged by, the Red Guards would drag them to a struggle session, it was called. And they would have to, stand up in front of people and apologize for what they had done. And they would be interrogated and they would struggle with the person until they changed their political line. And And sometimes these struggle sessions got very intense. People would have to walk on broken glass to show how sorry they were. People would have to wear signs around their necks. I am a counter-revolutionary. It was pretty brutal and intense. It was pretty brutal and intense. I don't think the Cultural Revolution was good. It was a mobilization of millions of Chinese young people to basically, to basically force communism, to force, a very, very extreme interpretation of communism on Chinese society. And it was, the idea was the Soviet Union and China are falling out. We're going to make China 100% pure communist, right? And I used to, when I was a teenager, right, I was really into Maoism. And I remember I read this book, Daily Life in Revolutionary China, that glorifies the Cultural Revolution. And I used to love the Cultural Revolution because I would read about the students at the school overthrowing their teacher, or their teacher not being a true communist. And that happened, right? Students did beat up their teachers for not, repeating communist line. And it seemed so ultra-democratic, the workers electing their managers in the factories. And, that it has this revolutionary, appeal to it. But if you look at the essence of the Cultural Revolution, anyone who lived through it, including the most dedicated, loyal Chinese communists, will tell you it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. I mean, it was not good for China, right? And the first stage of the Cultural Revolution is what I'm describing here. They mobilized the young people to go out and tear apart Chinese society, basically. So then, 1967, in Shanghai, you had the Red Guards and the labor unions overthrew the government, right? And they overthrew the Chinese government and established the Shanghai Commune, which was modeled on the Paris Commune of 1871. And they argued that in order to be truly communist and revolutionary, Shanghai had to be autonomous, and it had to be autonomous workers' councils. You would think that all the Maoists or all the anarchists would love this, right? It was anarchism in practice, and it was a nightmare. But yes, they violently overthrew the government of Shanghai. They established the Shanghai Commune based on the Paris Commune. And at that point, it was Lin Biao who was leading this. At that point, Mao and Lin Biao had a falling out. And Mao said, you can't do this. Okay, you can't overthrow the government of Shanghai. You can't establish a commune state and have one of the biggest cities in China become autonomous. You can't do that. So Mao stepped in and he, reimposed the Chinese government on Shanghai. And instead of having the workers' commune of worker self-management, they instead had what they called the 3-in-1 combination. And that was where, instead of the factory being autonomous, what happened is every factory was managed by an elected worker and a technician, an engineer, a specialist, and a Communist Party member. And it was the 3-in-1 combination. Communist Party member, elected worker, and technician. That's how they started managing the factories. And that was stage one of the Cultural Revolution, when the young people were mobilized to smash the temples and break the signs and search people's homes and attack people and just kind of force Chinese society to adopt full communism, to adopt, communist ideology everywhere. Any movie, any book, any play that was considered to be a symbol of the old way was destroyed, right? Leading up to the January storm of 1967, in which the government of Shanghai was overthrown. At that point, Mao steps in and stops the Red Guards. So then, after the events and the January storm, Lin Biao disappeared, and he was no longer in leadership. Right now, a few years later, they said he had tried to kill Mao and had died in a plane crash. It's very mysterious, the death of Lin Biao, the fall of Lin Biao, they call it. But after the fall of Lin Biao, at that point, you have the rise of the Gang of Four. And the Gang of Four, that's Mao's wife and this guy from Shanghai, this factory worker from Shanghai, and two other people. And I don't even remember all their names, but, the main one is Mao's wife. They're called the Gang of Four. And immediately, because there's so much chaos, in the cities with the Red Guard youth, right? And in Beijing, you had the Red Guard youth killing each other. They had civil war between, between communist factions, right? Whereas like, and the universities, the students at the universities were killing each other, and they were making cannons, and they were killing each other, different communist factions, Red Guard factions killing each other and all that. So when the Gang of Four came in after the fall of Lin Biao, they immediately deported all of the students to the countryside, right? And they said, look, in order to be a real communist, most of China's population is in the countryside. So all the young people, all the teenagers in China were taken out of the cities and sent to rural areas to, hoe sweet potatoes and grow crops and work on a farm. So all the teenagers of China were taken out of their parents' households and sent to the countryside to live with other Red Guards, where they would work in and do farm labor, and they would also have communist education, right? And it was, all the teenagers from the cities go to the countryside. And it's interesting because I had a professor who this happened to. She was a teenager, and they all got sent to the countryside. So, she had to say goodbye to her mom and dad, and she went to the countryside. And, she said that actually that was when she realized she wanted to be a professor, because, she lived with all the other young Red Guards, and she was required they all had to have classes. And so during the Criticize Lin Biao, Criticize Confucius campaign, she gave classes on why Confucius was wrong and why Mao Zedong thought was correct and why Lin Biao had been wrong. That's how she learned she wanted to be a professor. The first stage of the Cultural Revolution is all the young people are running around breaking things and beating people up. And then the second stage of the Cultural Revolution is all the young people are deported to the countryside. So all the young people are deported to the countryside, right? So you don't have the urban chaos of the young people, the Red Guards beating people up and the violence. What you do have, though, is that Mao's wife is constantly stopping the Chinese economy. Every time it looks like the Chinese economy is starting to move ahead, they have a strike. You can't make this up, right? It's a socialist country. They have a strike, and the workers have to go on strike against something, right? They have an anti-North Korea campaign, because North Korea is friendly to the Soviet Union and to China, to both. So they have a campaign where they mobilize all the workers in China instead of making things, and the workers are mobilized to go to the North Korean border and have rallies against Kim Il-sung, because he's a, quote, fat revisionist pig. As they burn, effigies of Kim Il-sung, the fat revisionist pig. There are trains going from the Soviet Union to Vietnam, bringing food and supplies to support the people of Vietnam during the war. And these Red Guard youth go out and block the trains. They block them because they don't, they're not going to help the revisionists in Vietnam. And it was just like, the Cultural Revolution, it started out with just chaos, with the Red Guard youth, forcing China to go to full communism with chaos in the streets. Then after that, it was no longer chaos, it was being directed from above. And it was being directed by the Gang of Four. It was being directed by Mao's wife, and she was directing it. And basically, if Mao's wife, if she had it in for you, you were done. We complain about cancel culture here in the United States. It was pretty extreme. There's the story of the glass snail incident, where, there's a group of students who went to the United States and found out that in America we have this thing called color televisions, right? And in all the socialist countries of the Eastern Bloc, they don't have color televisions because there's an embargo. You cannot send a color television to Latvia or Lithuania or Romania or the Soviet Union, right? You're not allowed to send it there because of the technology embargo, the NATO technology embargo. So, this group of students who went to the United States, they get the bright idea. They say, hey, why don't we make color televisions in China, and we can sell it to the Eastern Bloc? They can't buy it from the United States. No American company can sell it to them. But we in China, we can make color televisions, and we'll use America's, technology. We'll buy the rights or whatever. We'll buy the plans. We'll make the color televisions in China. We'll sell them to the Eastern Bloc, and China can become a wealthier country. Not a bad idea. So these students and the American company that hosted them gives them all a glass snail. A glass snail is like the symbol of, thanks for visiting our company. So they come back to China and they say, oh, look, this American company gave us glass snails and they'll sell us the rights to make color TVs. So we could send color TVs to the Eastern Bloc. Why don't we do that? Well, Mao's wife hears about this. Oh, no, 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 no. And she gives this fiery speech, and it's called the Glass Snail Incident. You can look this up. The Glass Snail Incident. China would never, never want to make a decadent Western item like a color television. Oh my God. And these students, don't you know the snail was intended to make fun of China. It was calling China a snail. And these students took that snail and they were shaming China. And she just ripped these students a new one. You know, that was killed, right? They couldn't make color televisions. So there you go, right? And that was that. The Gang of Four also declared that China could enter a higher stage in poverty, meaning that China could go to communism, full communism, in poverty, even though most of China's rural areas didn't have running water and electricity, even though China was still a deeply poor country, they could enter a higher stage in poverty. Enter a higher stage in poverty was the argument, right? You could get to full communism in poverty. That was the argument. And that's ridiculous, you know. And then China also started saying that they expected a nuclear war, that there was going to be a nuclear war between the Soviet Union and the United States, and that they expected at least 2/3 of humanity to die in nuclear war. You know, 2/3 of humanity was going to die in nuclear war. They had this theory, the theory of three worlds, where they argued that the first world was the USA and the Soviet Union, the second world was Europe, and China would lead the third world. And that China, because it was a big socialist country, it would lead the third world. And they said that the Soviet Union were revisionists, and they were social imperialists. They were the enemy. But China was happy to meet with Pinochet and recognize Pinochet. They were very happy to sit down with the Shah of Iran. They were happy to sit down with Haile Selassie, the dictator of Ethiopia. And they said, look, China can transition to a higher stage in poverty. We can have full communism even though we're dirt poor. Plus, we expect there to be a nuclear war between the USA and the Soviet Union. And after that, once the USA and the Soviet Union have nuked each other out of existence and 2/3 of the human race has died, why, China will take over the world, and China will be the leader of the world, and the world will be communist because it's led by China. This is insanity. This is ultra-leftist insanity, right? And Mao was very old, and was old and senile, and I believe he had trouble speaking during these years. I know, the USA and China did not have diplomatic relations at this point, but there was an Office of U.S. Interests in China. And the person who worked there was George Herbert Walker Bush. For a year, George Herbert Walker Bush lived in China at the Office of the U.S. Interests section, or whatever it was called, in China. And they, during these years, mid-70s, they took George Herbert Walker Bush, future president of the United States, to go meet with Mao. And he goes in and meets with Mao, and Mao can't speak. Right? Mao, he can't speak. He would write Chinese characters. He's got a translator, and Mao is sitting there, and he's the man's senile, right? He's senile. Mao is, at this point, Mao is very, very old, and he's senile, and he says stuff, according to George Herbert Walker Bush, he says stuff, it's completely incoherent. And he's not able to finish his sentences. He'll forget how to say words, and he'll write Chinese characters down on paper, and they'll remind him what the word is. And, Mao was completely out of it at this point. But it was Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, who was really running things, okay? And everyone was terrified of her. And the economy of China just kept getting worse, right? The economy wasn't getting better. They needed electricity. They needed running water. They needed to advance their economy. But every time they started advancing their economy, Jiang Qing, Mao's wife, would launch some horrendous campaign and terrorize people. And everyone was terrified. If you did the wrong thing, Mao's wife would go after you. Mao's wife was a wrecker. She was a wrecker. She was an ultra-leftist wrecker, right? She never built anything in her life. Mao's wife was a wrecker. Her whole life was about tearing people down, right? And she was very good at it. She was really good at tearing people down. She could tear people down very easily, right? And this is a dangerous thing that happens, right? You know, you know, when you are a leader of an organization, right? It becomes necessary to keep discipline in your organization. You know, you have to keep discipline in your organization. So often a leader who is a builder will have a strong man or a bouncer type person next to them, right? To kind of enforce their rule. But the problem is, and this is the problem that many bouncers have in bars, right? If there's nobody to fight, the bouncer's going to be out of a job pretty soon. So the bouncer at a bar sometimes is looking for somebody to rumble with. Even if everyone's just enjoying their time at the bar, the bouncer might be, hey, you talking to me? Because that's what bouncers do. And that's what Mao's wife was, right? Even if there was nobody to fight with, she was looking for somebody to fight with because that's what she did. She was a wrecker, right? I was in the Workers' World Party for many years, and there's a certain person who shall not be named who was basically the Jiang Qing of the Workers' World Party, right? That he was a thug, he's an ignorant, street thug that Sam Marcy found. He'd been a boxer before he'd been in the Workers' World Party. And he was Sam Marcy's strongman. And he had a bit of a problem because nobody ever wanted, there was nobody to fight. And so he was always looking for somebody in the party that he could have a fight with in order to prove that he was needed, basically. This guy, he's a piece of garbage, right? And after Sam Marcy died, this guy, he ran the group into the ground. Why? Because he'd never built anything. He was a wrecker. He was very good at kicking people out of the group. He was very good at threatening people. He was very good at marginalizing people. He was very good at, but he wasn't very good at building anything. He's a wrecker. My goodness, you all are making me nervous. But anyway, Jiang Qing is a wrecker. She's a wrecker, right? And this, that's what wreckers do. So, Mao died, and Deng Xiaoping took power, and, Deng Xiaoping arrested the Gang of Four. And when Deng Xiaoping arrested the Gang of Four, there was a huge amount of celebration because finally people were free from Jiang Qing, the wrecker. And Deng Xiaoping, his whole thing was all the people that Jiang Qing had gone after, engineering students, intellectuals, teachers, doctors. Those are the people that China needed. It needed smart people. It needed educated people. It needed people that were really, really good at math and science. And those were the people that Jiang Qing was going after. So after Deng Xiaoping came to power, he raised the salaries of those people. And he enabled, the creation of a private sector. And a lot of what Deng Xiaoping did saved China. It saved China from the nightmare of the Cultural Revolution, right? Now, right before Mao died, Zhou Enlai, who was somebody who was a very important leader of the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese foreign minister, Zhou Enlai died. And after Zhou Enlai's death, there was a counter-revolutionary riot in Tiananmen Square. They call it the Tiananmen Incident of 1976. And it was a counter-revolutionary riot of all these, doctors, lawyers, engineers, scientists, college professors, educated people who had seen Zhou Enlai as their last line of defense against Jiang Qing. And when he died, they went out and it was an anti-communist riot. And the funeral of Zhou Enlai turned into an anti-communist riot. And all those people rioting, those are the people that the US CIA used in the 80s to bring down the Soviet Union. The educated people, the children of the party elite, the folks who were frustrated with socialism. The people who wanted to go out and do something. Wanted to go out and create something, wanted to go out and build, and felt stifled by the state-run economy, right? Right? This is 1976, Tiananmen incident, separate from 89. It's a totally different thing, right? And the funeral of Zhou Enlai turned into a counter-revolutionary riot. And Deng Xiaoping took power, and when Deng Xiaoping took power, he was able to win those people back to supporting the party, right? By unleashing them, by letting them start their own businesses, by increasing their salaries, by making them useful. And that was the miracle. And the reason that China didn't have a counter-revolution in 1989. In 1989, all of the Eastern Bloc, Romania, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, all the socialist governments, one by one, were falling. 1989, 1990, 1991, it was like socialist country after socialist country would collapse, would collapse, would collapse. Well, China, they tried. 1989, Tiananmen Square was supposed to be the overthrow of the Chinese Communist Party, but it didn't happen because Deng Xiaoping had won back the support of the intellectuals. The people that were the base of counter-revolution all across Eastern Europe were not. They were loyal to the party. Right? And the Cultural Revolution was a disaster. I am not in favor of the Cultural Revolution. It was a disaster. And Deng Xiaoping, because he ended the Cultural Revolution, because he won back the support. Look, every society thrives on the middle class. All right? The rich are always happy. Right? The rich have what they want. They're the rich. The working class, the broad masses of working people in a non-revolutionary situation are generally not involved in politics. It's the middle class, the educated class, the professors, the doctors, the lawyers, the teachers, the engineers. If that layer is with you, your society is going to be strong. And if that layer is against you, then you have a revolution or your society crumbles. That's where societies thrive, in the middle. The people at the top are always happy. People at the bottom are generally apolitical. It's that middle layer. That is where societies thrive. And the problem with the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc was they lost those people. Those people, anyone who went to the Eastern Bloc in the 80s will tell you those people were miserable. They were angry. They were frustrated. They thought American capitalism was sexy because it had jeans and T-shirts and all of that, and Beatles music and drugs. They hated the communist parties. They were frustrated, alienated, and those countries fell apart. Well, China had the brilliance to turn that around really quickly, to reverse that. And that's why the Chinese Communist Party stayed in power. And let me add that now it's reversed. In Russia and China, right? When I go to Russia, when I go to China, those middle class people, those doctors, lawyers, teachers, professors, they love the government. They love the government. But here in the United States, they don't. Middle class is miserable, right? Doctors, lawyers, teachers, professors, they're moving to other countries, moving to China. I have good friends who've moved to China. They're moving to other countries. They're frustrated. They're hopeless. They're angry. You go to China, you go to Russia, you go to Venezuela, you go to Cuba. It's, these intellectual, the middle class is very, very loyal because the government helps them start businesses. The government helps them, create things. It's our society that's collapsing right now because the middle class is miserable. But in the 80s, in the late 80s, in the Eastern Bloc, it was their society where the middle class was miserable. And over in the United States, our middle class was having a great time. So, this is what you have to remember. And Deng Xiaoping had that understanding. And he, by unleashing the middle class, by lifting the restraints on them, by ending the Cultural Revolution, by putting the Gang of Four in jail, he saved China from the Cultural Revolution and from counter-revolution. There would have been a 1989-style counter-revolution in China if Deng Xiaoping had not done what he did. And Deng Xiaoping, in order to do what he did, he studied Marxism, and he made clear what Karl Marx wrote in the Critique of the Goethe Program, which is that communism, the higher stage of communism, is based on vast material abundance. You cannot build a stateless, classless world in poverty. It doesn't work that way. You can't do that. You cannot build a stateless, classless world in poverty. In order to build a stateless, classless world, you need vast material abundance. And so the Chinese Communist Party abandoned this belief of the Gang of Four. The Gang of Four said you can transition to a higher stage in poverty. They got rid of that. And they said, no, that's not Marxist. That's not materialist. And our goal is going to be to raise living standards and increase productive forces so that we can build an egalitarian society. And that was brilliant. That was brilliant. And the biggest mistake of the Cold War is that because socialism came first in the developing world, first in countries like Cuba and Vietnam and Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, and that the Western countries, didn't have socialist revolutions, you got excuse me, you got many socialist countries that abandoned that understanding and argued that you could transition to a higher stage in poverty. Che Guevara, as much as he was a great revolutionary, his economic theories, the theory of the new socialist man, well, it's not correct, right? You can't build a stateless, classless Cuba in poverty. For Cuba to reach full communism, Cuba would have to have vast material abundance, right? You can't have full communism in a deeply poor country. And thank you, everyone who's saying bless you. That communism requires vast material abundance. Stalin, in the final years of his life, he got that wrong, right? The Gang of Four in China really got it wrong. Che Guevara got it wrong. Well, that's what we've learned from the Cold War. You can't build an egalitarian society in poverty. Building an egalitarian society requires vast material abundance. And that is why I insist that the slogan, abolish billionaires, is anti-Marxist. Because in order to have full communism, you have to have so much wealth in society that inequality breaks down, that the need for the government goes away. In order to have full communism, you have to have everyone far richer than even the billionaires are in our time. The goal of communism is to utilize a centrally planned economy and the dictatorship of the proletariat to create a society with so much wealth that the need for the state fades away. And that means not abolishing billionaires. It means making everyone far richer than billionaires are in our time, right? To actually have a society where people just work because they feel like it, where labor becomes not a necessity, but life's prime want, as I believe how Karl Marx puts it, right? In order to do that, it is absolutely necessary to have vast material abundance. Marxism does not oppose growth. Marxism does not oppose wealth. It opposes exploitation, right? It wants, as Karl Marx said, the springs of cooperative wealth to flow more abundantly. And Deng Xiaoping understood that. Understood that the Che Guevara and Lin Biao and the Gang of Four were wrong when they said China could transition to a higher stage in poverty. Wrong. You cannot transition to a higher stage in poverty. Communism is based on vast material abundance. This is what Marx said. This is the economic basis of building a socialist society. And the belief that you can create a socialist society by willing it, right? You're just going to be like, we're going to be so communist that we're going to be communist. Sure, we're poor, but we're going to go and create full communism. That is a disastrous idea. And that's what they tried to do in the Cultural Revolution. China was deeply poor, and the Gang of Four said, well, sure, we're deeply poor, but you know what? We are going to build full communism, and we're going to transition to a higher stage in poverty because we're going to go, we're going to will it. You can't will communism into existence. That's not materialism. You cannot will communism into existence. You can sit there, you can be a deeply poor country, and you can go all you want, and you can scream communist slogans everywhere, and you can tear down every billboard that's anti-communist, and you can force only communist movies to be shown, and you can burn every book at the library. It's not a communist book. You can do all of that. and you can go, "Urgh," and you can flex, and you still don't have communism. Because communism is based on vast material abundance, and you can't transition to a higher stage in poverty. And I know this was a very long answer, but this is important to understand if you're going to understand Marxism, right? That the Cultural Revolution was a failure because the Gang of Four broke with the idea that communism is based on material abundance, right? And they didn't think of it. Stalin made this mistake. Che Guevara also made this mistake. But you cannot create communism in poverty. You cannot will communism into existence. Communism is based on vast material abundance. And that is an understanding that people need to get through their heads. And the Cultural Revolution is solid proof of that. The Cultural Revolution was a disaster. Was it a noble try? Was it a good try? I think most of the people who participated in the Cultural Revolution, most of them had good intentions. They believed in communism with all their heart and soul. They were being led by Lin Biao and Mao to try and make China as communist as possible, I think, but their effort was not correct. You cannot transition to a higher stage in poverty. So that's a long answer to the Cultural Revolution question. Any more super chats, folks? I can keep answering your questions. It's not like I'm just on here talking with you all. Isabel dos Santos. I haven't been following the situation in Angola lately. I've kind of fallen behind on Angola, so I'll have to look that up. I just haven't been following it. I like Isabel dos Santos a lot. I hope she can get back into politics. Alrighty. Class reductionism. Look, I've answered this before, but look, there's, actual class reductionism is wrong. Okay? Actual class reductionism is a bad thing, right? For example, there was a certain communist group that I will not name that at their rallies and protests would chant, "White power and black power are the same. Racism is the boss's game." Well, that's class reductionism, because white power and black power are not the same. White supremacists and black people fighting for their rights are not the same. And if you're saying, oh, they're just the same, all that matters is class, it's just workers and bosses. White power and black power are the same. Racism is the boss's game. That's class reductionism. And communist groups will occasionally do this. I mean, there are some communist groups that do engage in what you could call class reductionism, where, they'll say, oh, racism doesn't matter. Gender oppression doesn't matter. All that matters is it's all just the workers and the bosses. It's all the workers and the bosses. And honestly, probably the biggest form of class reductionism is ignoring the question of imperialism. Right? Imperialism is huge. And if you just say, no, it's workers and factory owners, which the bread tube crowd, this is class reductionism. When they think socialism is a pencil factory, and thank you, Wandering Left, when they think socialism is a pencil factory, and they're like, well, China and the USA are just as bad because the pencil factory in China and the pencil factory in the United States are not owned by a worker cooperative. So well, no. What about imperialism? All right, well, they ignore imperialism. They're class reductionists. Nope, it's just about workers and bosses, right? It's a factory owner versus factory worker. Nothing else matters, right? That's class reductionism, right? Imperialism, if you ignore imperialism, right? If you say a country that's fighting imperialism and a country that's resisting imperialism, or that is imperialism, are the same, that's class reductionism, right? Iran is not a Marxist country, right? They reject Marxism vehemently in Iran, right? They call their system not capitalism but Islam. But if the United States attacks Iran, and you go, oh, I'm not on either side, right? They're both capitalists, right? They're both not communists. So who cares? You are a class reductionist, right? There you go, right? Class reductionism is a real thing. What these people on the internet, these bread tubers who rant about class reductionism all the time, what they're really saying is you're not allowed to talk about actual Marxism. That's what they're saying. That if you talk about class at all, you are a class reductionist. That instead, you're not allowed to get on here and talk about all the stuff I've been talking on here about divisions in the capitalist class and Kamala Harris and the police state and imperialism. No, we can't talk about that. No, we need to talk about what celebrity was racist this week. We need to talk about, we need to talk about what celebrity was sexist this week. We need to talk about how Donald Trump is a big fat racist. It's basically what they're saying is you have to be an SJW. You're not allowed to be a communist because Marxism talks about like facts and history and economics, and real revolutionaries just gossip about this person's a sexist. Oh my God, this person's racist. Oh my God, this person is like such a sexist. Oh my God, this person is so transphobic. I can't believe that's what you're supposed to be, right? You're just supposed to be, you're not allowed to talk about actual ideology, theory. You're not allowed to talk about any of that, right? You just have to sit there and oh my God, that is like such a sexist thing to do. Did you see that? Oh my God. Oh, I am going to make a post and call him out because he is like so sexist. Oh my God. Well, I'm sorry. That's not me. I can't do that. I've written books. I wrote, we got the Center for Political Innovation educational manual. I'm interested in Marxism and theory and ideology and economics and history and all of that. And I'm sorry, I know that makes me a class reductionist. I know in the breadtube universe that if I talk about this stuff and I don't focus on Gossip Girl, SJW Gossip Girl, that makes me a bad person. Well, if you want to think I'm a bad person, fine. And let me just say this, right? Because I know there's a lot of people who watch me and they lurk. Okay? And you don't want to get in trouble for watching me, right? You know that you're thinking like, if I tweet out that I like Caleb or if I'm visible on his streams, there's going to be people who are going to call me a Nazbol and call me transphobic and call me this and call me that. And look, I got news for you. First of all, I'm none of those things, and you know that by watching me, number one. Number two, they're going to call you that anyway. Did you know that? The fact that you're even interested in what we talk about on here, they're going to call you that. So you're better off. You're better off just biting the bullet and saying, you know what? I like Caleb. I like the Center for Political Innovation. I like him. Come get me. You're better off just beating your chest and getting it over by now because you will never appease these people. You will never make these people happy. Sure, you can say you can avoid the fight over me. Fine. I may not be the hill you want to die on. Fine. But, it may not be the hill you want to die on. How can one be Christian and pro-abortion? All right. Christian, pro-abortion. That may not be the hill you want to die on, but you know what? I bet you have gone to a movie by some actor who said something bad. I bet that you take anti-imperialist positions. Look, I bet you have defended, when the USA, when it's time to bomb Iran, and BreadTube suddenly announces, you have to support, opposing Iran. Jabba the Vosh is on there going, you must support, if you don't support bombing Iran, you're a racist, sexist, transphobe, don't you know Iran is committing genocide, Biden is going to bomb Iran, and you're going to support it, And you go, wait a second, maybe war with Iran's not a good thing. You're going to get canceled. Did you know that? Right? When it's time to bomb Venezuela, and Jabba the Vosh is on there, mainstream media says Venezuela is eating babies alive. You don't believe it? That means you're a genocide denier. When he says that, and you go, well, maybe Venezuela, maybe we should listen to the facts. Did you see what Gray Zone said about that? You're gonna get canceled. And that's the thing, right? That cancel culture needs feeding. There is never a way to appease it. It's like McCarthyism, all right? It's like McCarthyism, right? When you got called before the House Un-American Activities Committee, you didn't just have to apologize and say, I'm so sorry for being a communist. You had to then, even if you never were a communist, you had to apologize. You couldn't defend yourself, because that would be proof of guilt. And then on top of that, you had to give them 10 more names of people who may not have had anything to do with anything, right? That's, read about McCarthyism. All kinds of people had nothing to do with the Communist Party. They went to a rally one time. They dated somebody or whatever. They get called before the House Un-American Activities Committee. And if they got up there and said, I didn't do anything wrong, oh, no, you can't do that. So instead, it was, yes, I apologize for being a member of the Communist Party. And here are 10 names of other people that were in the Communist Party with me. And that's how it kept going. That's how McCarthyism kept going. Right? As people would play ball, and they would get scared, and they would do that. And they would say, oh, and they would apologize, and then provide them with more names. And then more people's lives were ruined. And it feeds itself. That's how cancel culture works. Right? The more that you go along with it, right? The more that you let your actions be dictated by it, the more people get canceled, right? And that eventually they'll come for you. And eventually you're not going to be able to do anything. Look, you can't talk about trans rights now, right? You can't. If you get on there and say, I support trans rights, you will inevitably have somehow said it the wrong way. And you will get canceled, and there will be people sending you pictures of poop in your Twitter messages, and you will be attacked, right? They will find something. You will somehow get canceled, right? You will somehow get canceled. So it's better to just throw down and say, you know what? Bring it on. This is what I think, right? Now, within reason. Don't say things you don't think, right? There are a lot of issues I don't have clarity on, okay? And if I don't have clarity on an issue, I will be honest with you. Sometimes people will send me super chats, and I'll just say, I don't know. Someone just asked me about Isabel dos Santos. I was following that very intensely 2 years ago. I'm not now. So I just had to say, I don't know, right? And it's better to, if you don't know, just don't speak on it, because you don't know. But if you know, and you have a position, say it. Say it, say what your position is. And if people get all fired up, say, you know what? That's my position. If you have a position, say it. If you don't have a position, don't say it. Do some research first, learn, but just say, you know what? I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not afraid anymore. That's what you got to do. That's my advice. All right. The next super chat question was about the People's Party. Sorry, folks. Sorry about that. All right. The People's Party. The People's Party. Well, the People's Party was a political party that was formed during the... so you had the Republican Party, which was the anti-slavery party. The Whig Party basically collapsed. You had the Republican Party that was formed. And the Republican Party, that was the party of Abraham Lincoln, the party that wanted to get rid of slavery. And the Civil War happened. The Republican Party, they won the Civil War. And there were two factions in the Republican Party. There were the moderate Republicans and the radical Republicans. And Lincoln died. And the radical Republicans wanted to redistribute the land of the slaveholders. And they were much more supportive of labor unions. They were progressive. And the moderate Republicans they were in with the northern industrial capitalists, the railroad companies, and they were becoming imperialists. So the Free Soilers, they were called, those were small farmers who were supporting labor unions and had been anti-slavery. The Free Soilers broke away from the Republican Party and they formed the People's Party. And they were known as the Populists. And they wanted to nationalize the railroads. They wanted to create a silver standard rather than a gold standard. And they were called the Populists. And at first, the Populists were anti-racist, right? They were anti-racist at first, right? And they would talk against racism, etc. There's a very good pamphlet called Black Labor and Southern Populism by Vince Copeland on this very topic. However, racism increasingly moved into the populist movement. And it was William Jennings Bryan, who was a populist, who took populism back into the Democratic Party on the basis of racism. Right? William Jennings Bryan had been a populist leader. He was for a silver standard rather than a gold standard. He was for nationalizing the railroads. He gave the famous Cross of Gold speech condemning the gold standard and championing the rights of the small farmers and opposing child labor in factories and such. But he was a racist. William Jennings Bryan was a racist. And so as the populist movement gradually became dominated by racism, the Democratic Party was the party of Jim Crow. It was the party of the South. And so the populists moved back into the Democratic Party. So, but originally the People's Party had been anti-racist, and, it had fought against the trusts. They were called the big monopolies. And they were not an anti-capitalist party explicitly. They were an anti-monopoly party. They wanted small capitalism, not big monopolies. That's how they put it. They were for the producers rather than the big monopolies. The monopolists, they were for the producers, and they were progressive, socialistic, I guess, but they weren't explicitly Marxist. And they fought against the trusts, and they ranted against the big banks and against the big railroad companies. They were for the small farmers. They were friendly to the labor unions and the labor movement that was getting started. But then racism came along, and racism pulled the populist movement back into the Democratic Party, and that was what happened to it. And that's the history of the populist movement. Now, out of the populist movement, you got the first Marxist political party in the United States. It was called the Socialist Labor Party, the SLP, of Daniel De Leon. And he was somebody in this milieu, a college professor at Columbia University who had been in favor of Henry George and land redistribution and become a Marxist. And the SLP, they became like a kind of a Marxist sect that moved away from the populist movement. And eventually, after the downfall of populism, you had the rise of Eugene Debs and the Socialist Party. But the populist movement was a progressive movement against big monopolies that came out of the Republican Party. All right. The last super chat question I have, unless anybody wants to throw me another one, is one asked, how can one be Christian and pro-abortion? Well, there are a couple layers to that question. So first of all, you have to ask, so what does it mean to be pro-abortion? Right? There are many Christians in the United States who are morally opposed to abortion, but feel vehemently that it should not be illegal. They feel that the prohibition on abortion leads to back alley abortions, that we don't have a religious government in the United States, and there are many religious folks who are anti-abortion, but feel abortion should be legal. Hillary Clinton, I believe, coined the phrase legal and rare. So there's that layer. There's a lot of religious Christians who their faith they're Roman Catholic, or they are, evangelical or whatever, and their faith says abortion is wrong. However, they don't want it to be illegal. So are those people pro-abortion? They wouldn't call themselves pro-abortion. They would say they're anti-abortion, but they're also in favor of abortion being legal. So that's one layer, right? Invasion of Czechoslovakia, Hungarian uprising. All right. Czechoslovakia, Hungary, 1956. All right. So there's that layer. There are also some Christians who do not believe that a fetus constitutes a human life, and that they would argue that, and that I believe there are many Muslims also who argue that within the first trimester, an abortion is allowed. There are many Muslims who feel that, yes, after the first trimester, you can't get an abortion, but there's many Muslims who argue in the first trimester, you can get an abortion. There's many Muslims who don't agree with that, but there are some who do. And there are some Christians who feel like abortion should be allowed. They studied the Bible, they've discerned, they've gone over their faith, and they feel like it's not wrong. So I guess one could, it depends. I mean, there is no verse in the Bible that specifically references abortion. There's nothing in Jesus' teachings where he says, and blessed are those who do not abort. It doesn't say that, right? I mean, the idea that life begins at conception, which is generally the argument made by those who oppose abortion, want abortion outlawed, that is a subjective argument. Now, the Roman Catholic Church argues that. The Roman Catholic Church, though, also opposes birth control, right? Even though 90% of Catholics use birth control, the Roman Catholic Church argues that one should not use birth control. And even Roman Catholic school, I know people who went to Catholic school and were taught not to use condoms, right? That if you're having sex with somebody and you use a condom, even if you're your married spouse, you're saying to your married spouse, you don't offer your fertility, and that's, that's the Catholic teaching as well. So, the Catholic Church says life begins at conception, but also condemns the use of condoms. Meanwhile, right, there are many evangelicals who are okay with using condoms, but argue that life does begin at conception. But there are some, I would say it's a minority of religious folks who don't think that life begins at conception. So, you're asking, how could one be Christian and pro-abortion? If by pro-abortion you mean actually thinking abortion is ethical, right? Which there's many Christians who don't feel it's ethical, but feel it should not be illegal. But for the ones who do feel abortion can be ethical, they simply don't accept the premise that life begins at conception. So that's a theological disagreement. Now, as far as the legal question, right? The idea that life begins at conception, right? I mean, how do you prove that? How do you prove that? I mean, the Supreme Court ruling on abortion was basically that, in a situation where we don't know, by default, privacy rights, it becomes your business. So we can't prove in a court of law that life begins at conception. We cannot prove that. How are you going to prove that? That this fetus suddenly has a soul the second it's conceived. You can't prove that. Because we can't prove that, we cannot prove that this fetus, we can feel that in our souls. We can religiously believe that. But we cannot prove it. Because we can't prove it, who are we to tell women what they can do with their bodies? Right? At that point, right, because we cannot make a legal declaration that fetus is a human being with equal rights to the mother, right? Because we cannot make that legal declaration, we can't outlaw abortion. That's my belief. But if you want abortion to be illegal, right, you feel that fetus is a life, I respect you, and you're welcome to work with me in my movement. I would never want you banned from my organization. I would happily talk to you about socialism and engage with you. I don't think you should be canceled or unwelcome in socialist circles if you feel that abortion is wrong, right? Right? If you feel abortion is wrong, if you feel abortion should be illegal, that's your business, right? And I'm never going to change your perspective. And also, there's a racial aspect to this. And nobody talks about this, but it must be said. Some of the strongest opponents of abortion are Puerto Ricans. Did you know that? Some of the most vehement anti-abortion people in the United States are people of Puerto Rican heritage. You know why that is? Because, they were sterilizing them. Right? They have the memory of doctors sterilizing them, right? Our government was trying to prevent Puerto Ricans from having children, and against their wills was sterilizing them. Right? And so based on that, many Puerto Ricans, they might be Democrats, they might vote for the Democrats up and down, backwards and forwards, but they are going to be absolutely against abortion because there is a feeling that the white man was trying to wipe them out, and part of the way he did it was preventing them from having children. So abortion can't be tolerated. And to not be sensitive to that, right? And to say to Puerto Ricans, oh, you're sexist, no. You have to be sensitive to that. And there's many black people that feel the same way. There are many black people who remember the many genocidal things the U.S. government has done to black people, and based on that, feel that, again, that the white man is trying to wipe them out, and as a result, they feel very vehemently against abortion. And again, to deny that, to overlook that ugly history of eugenics and genocide and sterilizations and all of that, and to just deeply insensitive. So, there's a racial angle to it. but there's a lot of anti-abortion folks who are white, okay, and they don't have that history, and that's a different thing. But I mean, look, like I said, I'm not trying to win a culture war. I'm not, right? I believe abortion should be legal. Okay? That's my position. I think gay marriage should be legal. Right? I don't think in any conceivable way that it is wrong to be LGBT, right? To be trans or to be gay is your business, and I cannot understand for the life of me how there's anything wrong with that. Abortion, I don't know about. I don't know where life begins, but because I don't know, I sure as hell know the Supreme Court doesn't know, and I know it shouldn't be illegal. So that's my position. But if your position is different, if you say, well, you know what, I am deeply Muslim, or I'm deeply Jewish, or I'm deeply Christian, and I feel otherwise, I would happily work with you to fight for socialism, right? If and that's been my position. I am not going to win a culture war. I am not going to change the way you feel about these things. Everything I just said, to people who agree with me, it made sense. To people who disagree with me, it didn't matter. And that's the thing. I'm not going to win. I'm not going to win on this issue. So I just don't. All right. And that's my advice. Get over the culture war. Get over the culture war. The socialist movement will die if we continue to fixate on these culture wars, especially when there is a racial component to them, which no one wants to talk about, right? If you bring up Margaret Sanger and Malthusianism and eugenics, oh no, you're sounding like the right wing. Well, I don't care if I'm sounding like the right wing. Sometimes right-wing people say things that are true. A broken clock is right twice a day. Facts are facts. I don't care. Okay? I do not care. I do not care if me bringing up a fact is similar to when a right-wing person who has vehemently different views than me brings up a fact. I don't care about that. And I'm so sick of that. This idea that, I love this, right? Okay, you said something, and it sounds kind of like this completely other different thing that somebody else said. So therefore, it's this, no, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. Not the same thing. All right. Alrighty. Czechoslovakia, it was 1968. Hungary, it was 1956. Czechoslovakia, you had the rise of Dubček. Dubček took power, and he was he said he was for socialism with a human face. And he was the Trotskyites all loved him, and the anarchists all loved him. And he hated the Soviet Union, and he was for socialism with a human face. And we now know, you can go back and look at the facts, that he was being supported by the CIA and by Young Americans for Freedom and by fascist groups and all of that. And he took power in Czechoslovakia, and he was trying to move Czechoslovakia into the NATO camp. He was trying to, he said that he was going to, it was going to be pure democratic socialism, but, that's what a lot of the protesters said in '89, too. Look how well that went, right? He talked like he was, but, Czechoslovakia stopped supporting the people of Vietnam and their national liberation struggle. Anti-Sovietism came to dominate. Radio Free Europe, which was the voice of American intelligence, Radio Free Europe was broadcasting messages in support of Dubček. So the Soviet Union sent its military in, and many people in Czechoslovakia supported the Soviet Union doing that, right? You never hear about that. You hear about the people who didn't support him, which the intellectuals, the Prague Spring, the intellectuals, those folks were, yes, they were supporting Dubček, but there were a lot of working class factory people and a lot of rural folks working on collective farms who didn't support Dubček, right? It was a divided country, and they greeted the Soviet troops. There was divisions, okay? Soviet Union sent troops into Czechoslovakia in 1968 to, remove Dubček and to remove this covertly NATO-backed movement that was claiming to be democratic socialism, but was actually, and look what happened, right? All the formerly socialist countries, country after country in '89, the Prague Spring worked, right? 1989, 1991, Albania, Yugoslavia. All these countries, the democratic socialists, who just happened to be more pro-U.S. and anti-Russian, took power and brought in neoliberalism, right? Look at Eastern Europe in the early 90s. Look. That's what the socialism with the human face actually resulted in, right? A lot of the East Germans who took to the streets, they were advocating socialism with a human face, democratic socialism, anarchism, Trotskyism. Look what it got you. Look what it got you. So, uh, you know, um, the ultimate result when people like, Prague Spring took power, the ultimate result was neoliberalism. And if Dubček had stayed in power, you probably would have got neoliberalism. So the Soviets removed Dubček. Now, Fidel Castro very provocatively challenged the Soviets and said to the Soviets, now, would you have intervened to protect me? But, if you read Fidel Castro's speeches on Czechoslovakia, he makes very clear that Dubček was not good. Dubček was pro-NATO. He was, pro-imperialist. So it wasn't, people, there's this fantasy that people have that, oh, no, finally there was a true democratic socialist, an anti-Stalinist, and then the Soviets crushed him. No, 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 no. Trust me, if Dubček had been more left-wing and more revolutionary than the Soviet Union, then the USA would have supported the Soviets in crushing him. No, 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 no. All right, and Hungary in 1956. Well, Hungary in 1956, right? You have a socialist country, but there's disagreements, and there were some things that the Russians did in Hungary that caused resentment among the population, and the same in Czechoslovakia too. Let's not gloss over this, right? That there were policies that the Soviet Union had, there were things that were done that were bad, right? And that's the thing. There are always legitimate grievances, and that's every color revolution, every CIA destabilization. They find legit stuff. Look, I mean, there's a lot of things to be mad about in this world, and there's a lot of policies that could be better, right? So, they love to do this, right? As soon as you point out that, these revolts are led by the CIA, they immediately jump on it. He said that the only reason somebody wouldn't like the government of Hungary in 1956 is because of the CIA. Well, yeah, well, my uncle was there, and he said, it's like, cool your jets, okay? Cool your jets. Cool your jets. There were plenty of legitimate grievances against Hungary in 1956. There were plenty of legitimate grievances against Czechoslovakia in 1968. Okay? Plenty of legitimate grievances. The question was, the forces leading the opposition, were they going to make things better in Czechoslovakia or make it worse? Well, look at what happened after the fall of the Soviet Union. We saw what these forces were bringing. It didn't make it better. Right? I mean, look, country after country after country across the Eastern Bloc, these people say overwhelmingly in poll after poll after poll that life was better before the fall of the Soviet Union. Free market neoliberalism was a nightmare. So, if you want to pretend that, that's not, I'm just telling you, right? The question isn't, was anything wrong with the Soviet Union? There was clearly plenty wrong with it. Question isn't, was there anything wrong with Hungary in 1956? There was plenty wrong with it. The leader of the Hungarian opposition in 1956 was Cardinal Mindszenty. Cardinal Mindszenty, a Roman Catholic clergyman, was a fascist. And that is a fact. He was tied to fascism. He had made pro-Hitler statements. He was a Hitler sympathizer. He was an anti-Semite. He was an anti-communist. He wanted to dismantle socialism. He was a fascist sympathizer. Sebastian Gorka from the Trump administration wears like badges in honor of his fascist relatives who fought against the Soviet Union. David Irving, the leading Holocaust denier. David Irving, did you know this? David Irving, the leading Holocaust denier, wrote a book glorifying the Hungarian Revolution of 1956. Look it up, right? So if you think that the Hungarian Revolt of 1956 is good, you have the same position as David Irving, the white supremacist, Holocaust-denying neo-Nazi. He also loved the Hungarian Revolt of 1956. The anarchists and the Trotskyites and David Irving have the same position. And yes, the Hungarian Revolt of 1956, again, were there legitimate grievances? Yes. Was the revolt led by good people? No. No. Cardinal Mindszenty was not good. No. Nope. No, it was a fascist uprising against socialism, and and the Soviet Union, made mistakes in how it operated in Hungary. There were certainly things that the Soviet Union did that made the situation worse, no question about it. But at the end of the day, should socialism have been overthrown, or should it not have been overthrown? Should the fascists have been able to take power and bring in free market neoliberalism, or should the Soviet Union have remained in power in Hungary? Well, we all know what happened in Hungary after the fall of the Soviet Union. Things got a lot worse. So, I think we all know, and poll after poll after poll in Hungary says life was better before the fall of the Soviet Union. So I think we all pretty well know. I've always told people, I used to live in Cleveland. Cleveland, great city. There are many, many Hungarians in Cleveland. Many Hungarians in Cleveland who fled from Hungary in 1956. Go and talk to them. Go and talk to them. Go ask them if they are the real communists, right? They were fighting for workers' councils and anarchism and Trotskyism. No, ask them if they were the real communists. Go to a Hungarian bar and ask some of the Hungarians there. So you guys are like the real communists, right? Fighting Stalinism, right? And see what kind of answer you get. See what kind of answer you get from the Hungarians living in Cleveland. Those folks are not Trotskyites. Those folks are not anarchists. Those folks are right wing. Those folks are very, 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 very right wing. Okay, and I mean, you can deny that all you want, but yeah, if you think, again, Cleveland is full of Hungarians who fled in 1956, and their kids and their kids' kids. Go talk to those folks. Now, your family fled because you're like the true Marxist-Leninist, not like Stalin, right? Yeah, good luck with that one. Good luck with that one. Now, someone asked, am I more sympathetic to Protestant, Christianity? And the answer is yes. I grew up as a Christian Protestant. I don't understand Catholicism. I'll be honest. My wife is Catholic. I had many Catholic. When I was a kid, see, this is what people don't get. See, in New York City, people think the Catholic Church is like the most conservative thing ever, right? And they all want to trade their horror stories about nuns beating them in Catholic school and all that. Like, when I was growing up, I thought Catholics were like edgy, right? Catholics, sometimes they smoked cigarettes, they drank alcohol, and some of them even voted for Democrats. The Catholic folks were they were not evangelicals, and so they seemed a little bit more down to earth. I mean, the Catholic families that I knew, they were a little more rational. They weren't, most of them were Republicans, but they weren't, they weren't fanatics. They weren't, extreme. In the area I grew up in, the Catholics, they seemed like, they believed in evolution, for goodness sakes, right? The Catholic Church does accept Darwinian evolution. It doesn't believe in six-day creationism. So when I was growing up, I thought Catholics were, if someone was Catholic, they were more likely to be someone I could be friends with than if they were not, But here in New York City, people think the Catholic Church is the most conservative, right-wing, it's like all these, I'm a recovering Catholic, all this, it's, I don't know. I mean, when I was a kid, I thought Catholics were left-wing, Catholic, and whatever. Anyway, but yeah, I just, I'm not Catholic, and there are so many things that, papal infallibility, I could never, I couldn't accept that. The Protestant Reformation. Look, I wrote a play when I was a teenager. I wrote a play about the Protestant Reformation that was performed at my church. Believe it or not. Believe it or not, I remember I was even in the local newspaper because I wrote a play about the teachings of Ulrich Zwingli. And the founder of the Swiss Reformed Church, right? The church I grew up in, it was part of the United Church of Christ, congregational, but it had merged in as part of the Swiss Reformed Church. And I learned about Ulrich Zwingli, the founder of the Swiss Reformed Church. And so I wrote a play about the life of Ulrich Zwingli, the Swiss Reformationist, right? That's how much of a good little Protestant I was. And papal infallibility, I can't go there, I mean, I'm a Protestant. I believe in growth. I believe in hard work. I believe in developing a personal relationship with God, and that prayer and personal spiritual interactions are deeply, deeply important, and that one must establish their own relationship with a higher power, that it cannot, it cannot come through a priest. I don't, the tradition around saints, I can't, that's not my understanding. Look, deep respect to everyone who's Roman Catholic who's watching this, to everyone who is Orthodox and watching this, to everyone who's not a Christian and watching this, deep respect, deep respect. But I'm just telling you, my personal beliefs are very Protestant. I'm a Protestant. I am very much a Protestant. I use a King James Bible. I study a King James Bible. I carry it with me everywhere in my bag that I carry with myself. It's it's like a good luck charm, in a way. I'm a Protestant. I am definitely a Protestant. So that's all there is to it. You're asking me about my religious beliefs. Why does that come up so much on here? I mean, my opinion is that religion is a deeply personal matter, right? My religious beliefs are my own. I would not try to force my religious beliefs on anyone, ever, right? I would never try to force my religion on anyone else, right? I am very, very, when I went to Iran, I was deeply in awe of Shia Islam and the teachings that they have around Imam Hussein and Imam Ali. I'm not a Muslim. I don't accept Islam. I am a Christian, but, it's definitely something that fascinates me. And, I'm very impressed by liberation theology and how it has motivated Bolivarianism. And, there are many atheist revolutionaries who I greatly admire, like Lenin and such. So the idea that that one's religious beliefs define, I don't accept that. I really don't. I think that I think religion is a personal matter, and it has no place in American politics. I'm not trying to build a religious government, and I would object, even if it was my religion, even if they built a government exactly modeled on my religion, I would still object to it, because I believe we need a secular government. We need a secular government, right? And that religion is your relationship. It's between you and God. It's between you and your faith community. And religion is deeply personal. That's my perspective. I am for a secular government. I am for a secular government. Okay? That is my position, right? And I having grown up in an area, right? I grew up in a small town in Ohio where, even though we have a secular government in the United States, evangelical Christianity was being pumped. The public schools were being used to promote evangelical Christianity nonstop. And because of that, I vehemently feel that we need the separation of church and state. I'm furious about it. Honestly, I'm furious about it. I'm not an evangelical. I do, at this point, I am very much a Christian. I rediscovered my faith and such, but I am adamant. There should not be prayer in school. If kids want to pray on their own before their big test or whatever, that's their business. Teachers should not be praying in school. There should not be Bible reading in public schools, right? I'm sorry. Public schools are government institutions. They are government institutions. And teachers should not. Look, I sat through so much of this. What's the super chat here? Right? Will become more inclined towards traditional Catholicism or continue evangelical Protestant? Oh, that's a good question. Trad versus, I'm sorry, but, after 9/11, I had in science class, I remember my science teacher, when I was in junior high, I was in 8th grade, explaining to us that 9/11 had happened because Muslims don't have the 10 Commandments. They don't have thou shalt not kill. They don't believe in the 10 Commandments. First of all, that's not accurate. Second of all, has nothing to do with science. Third of all, that's a deeply bigoted and offensive statement. It has no place in a classroom. And I had to sit through this crap. And I'm furious about it. We would have a Christmas assembly every year when I was in elementary school. They always managed to get the manger scene in there. And the thing that I didn't understand, and that still gets me fired up, I do not understand. So these people were praying in school, right? I remember, the guidance counselor at my school, she starts this prayer circle around the American flag, and ministers coming in every Thanksgiving. We had a minister come in to the school and preach a sermon, all this religion is happening. There was a prayer. There were two prayers at my graduation. There was an opening prayer and a closing prayer at my graduation. I mean, all this violation, right? So they're flaunting the separation of church and state left and right, right? Ministers coming in and giving sermons, teachers giving religious rants in school. Prayers at graduation. They're flaunting left and right, and it's not just they're just constantly breaking it. But at the same time that they're constantly flaunting it, they're always going, "We're persecuted. Oh, it's illegal to pray in school. You could go to jail. Oh, it's so hard to be a Christian. We're persecuted." Like, how are you persecuted if you're breaking the rules all the time? I'm sorry, how are you persecuted when the minister comes in every year on Thanksgiving to give a sermon? How are you persecuted when there's two prayers at graduation? I'm sorry, you're not being persecuted. And it was this weird doublethink they had in their heads. Somehow, they're in charge of everything. We're doing religious stuff all the time. We're doing religious stuff in a public school, which is illegal. But the whole time that they're doing this in a public school, the whole time that they're violating the law, at the same time, then they say, "Oh, but we're persecuted. We're not allowed to practice our religion. It's illegal to be a Christian now. They're persecuted." No, you're not. No, you're not, right? You can't have it both ways. Either you follow the rules and don't have Christianity in public school, and then because you don't understand that, we have separation of church and state, and you assume that you should be the de facto religion, you can walk around and go, "I'm persecuted." Oh. But you can't have prayer in school, have ministers come in, have prayer at graduation. You can't do all of that and then claim to be persecuted at the same time. I mean, these people, I just want to slap them right now. I just want to slap them. I'm not going to do that because I don't believe in violence. I'm not violent. I'm not going to advocate. But part of me just wants to slap these people. Just be like, okay, all right, you can claim you're persecuted if you live in New York City and there's no religion in school like it's supposed to be for the whole country. But you can't claim you're persecuted in the town I grew up in. Oh, no, 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 no. You cannot claim you're persecuted in the town I grew up in. No. And it infuriates me. It really, really infuriates me. It's infuriating to hear these people, "Oh, we're persecuted. Now let's go have a mandatory prayer at graduation." No, you're not persecuted. So shut up. Sorry. You got me fired up there. And again, it's because of this kind of stuff that I lost my faith. Right? Really. I mean, this stuff destroyed my relationship with God. I was so angry about this stuff, about this malarkey, this 9/11 happened because they didn't read the Bible, this kind of crap. I was so angry about this kind of stuff that I lost my relationship with God, for Christ's sakes. I mean, I lost my faith because of this malarkey. And I really feel bad about that. But this, anger at this kind of malarkey, right? This flaunting of U.S. laws and all of that, I lost my faith, right? And thank goodness I could get it back. I could move to New York City, and I could go to Iran, and I could travel, and I could rediscover my faith. And, thank goodness I was able to rediscover my faith. But it was very difficult because, I'm sorry, when your faith becomes synonymous with this stuff, it's very easy to lose it. Very easy to lose it, right? And that actually brings me to the next Super Chat question. Someone said, "Do you think traditionalist Catholics or evangelicals will become popular on the right?" Well, traditionalist Catholics are fringe, okay? I mean, they're much bigger than they used to be. It's a big thing among people that used to be like, Richard Spencer, white supremacists. Now a lot of them are becoming traditionalist Catholics. And I've actually met the big traditionalist Catholic, right? Because I've been to Iran. I'm sorry, it's just a fact. I have been more than in the same room with E. Michael Jones, right? Because I went to Iran and I was in conferences, and E. Michael Jones, Dr. E. Michael Jones of Indiana, and me, we have spent more than a little bit of time together. So, I'm sure that gets me canceled, right? I'm sure someone's going to dig up a picture and be like, "Oh my God, Caleb's sitting next to..." He's very anti-Semitic, no question about it. That dude is definitely anti-Semitic, and yes, I've been in the same room as him, so go ahead and cancel me for that too. Somebody dig up a picture of me standing next to E. Michael Jones, and you can cancel me for that. Just go right ahead. Put it in the picture next to Dugan and the picture next to a lot of different people. But, I've spent a lot of time in the same room as the big traditionalist Catholic fellow, right? Now, I don't agree with him, obviously. But, I'm quite familiar with traditionalist Catholic teachings, right? Having been to Iran and sat across from Dr. E. Michael Jones. Best country to study socialism. But having done that, I still feel like traditionalist Catholics are fringe. Okay, I mean, it's a fringe group, right? It's a fringe group. Okay, there's Catholicism, the religion. Then there's political Catholics. Which there's a lot of Catholic Democrats, but there are there are like Catholics that are very dedicated to protesting against abortion and all of that. And on the fringe of the political Catholics, like political Catholics is a minority. Most Catholics are not political. It's just their faith. It's their culture. They're Irish. They're Italian. They're from Louisiana. It's just they grew up in it. This is their church, whatever, right? But there's a small minority of Catholics that are political Catholics, okay? And among political Catholics, there is a small minority of what you can call trad Catholics or traditionalist Catholics, okay? And those are the folks that reject Vatican II, generally. They think that the Pope is a big sellout, and they want the Mass to be in Latin again. And they tend to really hate Jews, also. They tend to think Jews are bad, and Jews... I don't want to repeat what they say, but you can look this up. Conspiracy of trad Catholics that the CPUSA infiltrated the... We can talk about that, right? Right? But yes, there is a minority, and trad Catholics are fringe. So the idea that they're going to become the big trend on the American right, look, anything's possible. When capitalist society breaks down, a lot of things happen. I don't really see them becoming a mainstream current anytime soon, okay? I really, really don't see that happening. I mean, never say never, right? I mean, look, a lot of people said socialism would never be popular, and now we got Bernie Sanders and BreadTube, So, never say never, but I think the chances of traditionalist Catholicism becoming bigger are pretty slim. That said, evangelical Christianity is very weak right now. It's very weak, and it's weak for the reasons I just ranted about. Look, I'm sorry, listen to Joel Osteen, right? He's on TV. I think you could probably, I have cable. I don't watch much TV. My wife generally, is watching TV, and she's watching like cop shows and stuff that I don't watch. But, I think you can watch Joel Osteen 24/7 if you wanted to. I think you could probably sit there. There's probably, if you just flipped through Christian channels, you could watch Joel Osteen, nothing but Joel Osteen 24/7. And that's a bunch of malarkey. I mean, I'm sorry. That's like self-help stuff dressed up as Christianity. That's like, it's poorly delivered. He delivers it in a very robotic way. I am reading from a teleprompter. And one should always dress nice for a job interview. I mean, it is the most, like, I'm sorry, is there any Christianity in that? I mean, it's, God will help you start your own business and get rich. God will help you get a promotion at work. You can be, I'm sorry. I mean, you listen to a lot of this stuff. A lot of what passes for evangelical Christianity, it's pretty lame. I mean, you listen to Billy Graham, early Billy Graham, that's some evangelical stuff with some fire behind it, right? Early Billy Graham sermons. Billy Graham in the 50s, there's some oomph there. Billy Graham in the 60s, there's some oomph there. But, I don't know. 90s, I mean, what we got now for evangelical Christianity, a lot of it is very, 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 very opportunistic. Support Israel, support the Republicans, oppose abortion, oppose gay marriage, and I don't know. I mean, go listen to, if you want to know, listen to what's his name? Who's the big guy on Fox News? He's a pastor, governor of Arkansas. What is his name? I can't remember his name. I cannot remember his name for the life of me. What is his name? It's escaping me. I'm tired. Oh, goodness, I'm tired. What's his name? He's on Fox News, and he runs for Mike Huckabee. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Mike Huckabee. Now, I'm Mike Huckabee. Now, folks, I don't believe abortion should be legal. I'm Mike Huckabee. I just don't believe it should be legal. Now, it was the corniest jokes. I was listening to Mike Huckabee one day. I got on a kick. I was listening to Mike Huckabee's speeches. And I remember I heard Mike Huckabee, and he said, I hear that Barack Obama has 3 new advisors for negotiating the Iran deal. They're called Larry, Curly, and Mo. You know, I mean, give me a break. Give me a break. You know, I mean, it's just, oh God. I mean, the corniest jokes and, you know, oh boy, Mike Huckabee. Mike Huckabee. That is, yeah, that is something special. I mean, you know, that stuff is very shallow. And the evangelical, look, the kids aren't becoming evangelicals. The parents, yeah, they're being evangelicals. And sure, there's some hardcore groups, right? Mormons aren't evangelicals, they're their own thing, but Mormons, they hang out in those circles. You know, but yeah, the evangelical movement, I'm sorry. Look, I remember the new atheists, Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, they gave them a punch in the nose that they have not recovered from. All right? Because that, during the Bush years, that was big. The Bush years, that stuff was really big. And then, don't know who it was, you know, they came along, the new atheists came along and gave the evangelicals a punch in the nose. The God Delusion, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and, you know, gave them a punch in the nose. And, you know, it's much more voluntary. Let me put it that way. It's much more voluntary. Yeah. Used to be a lot of people were evangelicals because they grew up as evangelicals. Everyone at their school is evangelical. Not so much. Now, on your phone and on your computer, you can hear Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins. And a lot of people go from evangelical to atheist very quickly, right? That didn't used to happen. But, you know, they got a pretty solid punch in the nose. What's the best country to study socialism outside of the United States? Well, I've not been to China, so I don't know. I mean, you know, I'm sure there's people in the chat who would say China. I haven't been there, so I can't testify to that. I've learned a lot about socialism in Venezuela. I mean, I will say probably the best thing to do is go to international communist gatherings. Go to the World Festival of Youth and Students, right? That, you know, go and talk to communists, right? Go to international gatherings of communists. That's what I would do. You know, so there you go. Alrighty. And have I heard about the CPUSA infiltrating the Catholic Church, conspiracy theory by traditionalist Catholics? I have not heard about that. It doesn't surprise me, though. I got my hands on a McCarthyist book one time. None Dare Call It Treason. Right? And there's another book called None Dare Call It Conspiracy that came out afterwards. And it's like, every church is communist. Every corporation is communist. The Rockefellers are communist. A lot of that John Birch conservative stuff is so off the wall and crazy. I mean, you know, who's not a communist, right? That doesn't surprise me, right? You know, and that, you know, trad Catholics thinking that the Catholic Church is communist. What? I know. The Pope said, feed the poor. What? Where's he going to get the food to feed the poor? He's going to have to tax people. That's the government taking stuff. That's communism. Right? This is how these people argue, right? I mean, it's like, this is, you know, right? Well, the Pope said that we should, you know, that the downtrodden should be listened to. Well, next, after they listen to, they're going to revolt. And what is that when the downtrodden revolt? That's communist revolution right there. Oh, my God. Ooh. Ooh, Lordy. Yes, yes, yes. Wow, folks. This has been a wild stream. But I'm glad you all are here. I deeply appreciate all of you. Hopefully my next stream is not having lights go out, no cockroaches. But hey, you all are here. We have a great community here. I love all of you deeply. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Thoughts on the reemergence of socialism in Africa? I think it's very, very possible. I think it's very, very possible. The Belt and Road could definitely make it happen. I'm very excited, to see, China and Africa teaming up. I'm also excited about Russia's continued investment in Africa. So yes, I think there is definitely a possibility there. And on that note, I will end this stream because it's a late night. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night. Good night.